3 minutes after 10 is the time. A very good morning indeed to you. Breaking news, of course, throughout the programme this morning as Israel moves into Lebanese territory, currently denying clashes with Hezbollah, but the stakes could hardly be higher. And of course, we have been here before in 1982 and in 2006. William Hague puts it rather well in the Times today. Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982 and again in 2006, but only outraged world opinion while making Lebanese politics even more intractable and Israel itself, in the longer term, less secure. Is there any reason to imagine that the outcome will be different this time? There's that old line, isn't there, that it turns out that Albert Einstein almost certainly didn't say. But it has nevertheless got 3/4 of the way around the world before the truth has got its trousers on. That the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again in the hope of a different result. What different result could there possibly be? Things that you don't know, things that you don't understand, things that you don't think. I beg your pardon, that sounded rather condescending. Things that we don't understand. If you're mourning the passing of Hezbollah's leader, then you almost certainly have not been paying attention. You certainly have not paid any attention whatsoever to what has gone on in Syria, where he essentially operated in lockstep with Vladimir Putin. If you think that Hezbollah and Hamas are the same entity, well, you're not quite as mistaken as you would be with the attitude towards Hezbollah's leader. But if you think that Lebanon and Gaza are the same proposition, then again, you haven't been paying any attention at all. If you think that the notion of Benjamin Netanyahu essentially dedicating himself exclusively to self-preservation still applies in this case, you're probably closer to the money than you would be on any of the other 3 points, unless, of course, you've got an answer to the question of why would 2024 be any different from 1982 and 2006 in the context of what is currently underway. Sirens currently going off in Tel Aviv as explosions are heard there. This is absolutely horrible, whichever way you look at it. I wish that were true, by the way. There will be people feeling a sort of a celebratory bellicose impulse this morning as they see their enemies, their perceived enemies, come under attack. And that's something that will apply to both sides in any armed conflict. Hezbollah now retaliating with strikes across the Israeli border or their border with Israel. But there's one contribution from the Jordanian foreign minister who was speaking at a sort of fringe event of the United Nations General Assembly on Friday. Ayman Safadi is his name. And this was something that resonated with me all weekend and came galloping back to the forefront of my consciousness today.
The Israeli Prime Minister came here today and said that Israel is surrounded by those who want to destroy it, an enemy. We're here, members of a Muslim Arab committee mandated by 57 Arab and Muslim countries. And I can tell you here, very unequivocally, all of us are willing to, right now, guarantee the security of Israel in the context of Israel ending the occupation and allowing for the emergence of a Palestinian state, independent state, along the efforts that we all agree. He is creating that danger because he simply does not want the two-state solution. And if he does not want the two-state solution, can you ask the Israeli officials, what is their end game? Other than just wars and wars and wars. I'm telling you, all of us in the Arab world here, we want a peace in which Israel lives in peace and security, accepted, normalized with all Arab countries in the context of ending the occupation, withdrawing from Arab territory, allowing for the emergence of an independent, sovereign Palestinian state on June 4, 1967, lines with occupied Jerusalem as capital. That is our narrative. That is, and we will guarantee Israel's security in that context. Can you ask Israelis what's their narrative other than I'm going to continue to go to war, I'm going to kill this and kill that and destroy this and that? The amount of damage that Israeli government has done, 30 years of efforts to convince people that peace is possible, this Israeli government killed it. The amount of dehumanization, hatred, bitterness will take generations to navigate through. So ultimately the question is, we want peace. And we've laid out a plan for peace. Ask any Israeli official, what is their plan for peace? You'll get nothing because they're only thinking of the first step, we're going to go destroy Gaza, inflame the West Bank, destroy Lebanon, and after that, they have no plan. We have a plan. We have no partner for peace in Israel. There is a partner for peace in the Arab world.
There is a partner for peace. There is a path to peace, whether or not the coalition of Arab countries that the Jordanian foreign minister refers to could successfully contain Hamas or more problematically Hezbollah, which of course enjoys the full-throated support of the Iranian regime, is a question for people with rather more knowledge and expertise than me. But that question shines out, doesn't it, from all of the discussions surrounding this issue. That what is the end game? What is the plan? What is the Israeli narrative? It is hard to imagine what the answer to that might be until you remember the explicit or implicit rejection of any two-state solution by Benjamin Netanyahu and many of his closest allies, up to and including, I think, I better triple check actually, this is too fraught territory for me to rely upon my creaking memory for the absolute specifics of individuals who've made it pretty clear that they don't consider the two-state solution to be a viable alternative. You could, of course, point to the charter of Hamas to prove that they also don't subscribe to the two-state solution. But when you look at the world, when you look particularly at that part of the world, and you look at all the vested interests, you hear the sense of urgency in the voice of the Jordanian foreign minister. And remember, if you see any hardline Israelis holding up maps of Greater Israel, which generally runs from the river to the sea, although, of course, early on in this conflict, somehow in this country, that phrase became loaded in entirely one direction. But it appeared in the Likud manifesto when Benjamin Netanyahu was, I think, while he was leader. But you see the map of Greater Israel, the Kingdom of Jordan has an awful lot to worry about, because on some of the maps of Greater Israel that I've seen, the Kingdom of Jordan doesn't exist. So he has skin in the game sounds like a horrible phrase to use, but you understand what a dog in the fight. You understand what I mean. That the idea that the world is divided along entirely religious or sectarian or ethnic lines here is completely wrong. And I think the comments of the Jordanian foreign minister, speaking by his own account for 57 other Arab nations, rather give the lie to the idea that this is a war between Israel and everybody else in the area. I could be wrong. The phone lines are open, 0345 6060 973. It is some time, of course, since Benjamin Netanyahu actually revealed his secret dreams when he said, if we get it right, we'll have a chance to get all the Arabs out. We can clear the West Bank and sort out Jerusalem. You may have a case for arguing why his behaviour since, or certainly his behaviour in the last year, gives the lie to that echo of his own youth. But you'll have to have got up early today, because that's the question I've got for you. There are two ways of answering this question. What is Benjamin Netanyahu's endgame narrative intention in his own mind, which of course we can't read, but we can speculate, 0345 6060 973. And what is the likely consequence, because I don't think there's going to be an end game, what is the likely consequence of this epic escalation? And remember, the killing in Gaza hasn't stopped yet. It's just the spotlight that's moving now towards Lebanon. Thousands and thousands of missiles fired into northern Israel from Lebanon since October the 8th or 9th, in the immediate aftermath of the October the 7th attacks, and displaced Israelis in the tens of thousands. A report I read earlier, 1 million displaced Lebanese. So human life, human disruption, human existence being curtailed, being ended, being disrupted. And those of us who refuse to feel sorrier about one person's plight than we do about another, based upon the ethnicity or religion into which they were born, have once again found ourselves up against what I presume are impenetrable problems. But let's try. 0345 6060 973. They tried it twice in recent history. Again, it's extraordinary how many opinions seem to be ignorant of the most obvious facts, but we live in an opinion age, don't we? We don't live in an information age. You don't really need to know anything to have your 2 cents worth, although I'd rather, if you're ringing me today, you were aware of things, for example, like the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu has made it clear that even in the event of all the hostages still being held in Gaza being released, the offensive there will continue. So some of these trite, glib, throwaway lines that people use as fig leaves in order to disguise their own bloodlust are important to remove them, or at least to highlight them. William Hague, again writing in the Times today, describes himself, and this is important, as a supporter of Israel, which is a supporter of the modern state of Israel's right to exist, with some room for discussion about perhaps where its borders should be rather than where they are, is a position that, I certainly hold. But he came under attack, or rather, in his own words, he upset many fellow supporters of Israel by saying in the Commons that the invasion of Lebanon was disproportionate and counterproductive. The Israeli Air Force, back in 2006, ran out of precise targets very quickly and attacked civilian infrastructure. The army became bogged down and was fought to a standstill by Hezbollah. Even if it goes better this time, even if it is, if you like, a more successful campaign for the Israelis, what happens next? What is the end game? What is the narrative? So the Foreign Minister of Jordan urging the world's media to ask any Israeli official, what is the end game? What is the plan? And it has to be plausible, I'm afraid. He also spoke very powerfully, didn't he, of the generational damage that's been done now. And this is where those of us who refuse to feel sorrier for the death of an Arab than we do for the death of a Jew feel worse about the killing of a Muslim than we do about the killing of a Jewish person. This is where our hearts break. Because the idea that you are going to eradicate resentment of the modern state of Israel by killing my parents or my grandparents is absolutely insane. It's absolutely insane. So, I suppose the first and easiest and most obvious answer to the question of what is the plan would be that, from Benjamin Netanyahu's point of view, that the plan is an endless and perpetual cycle of war, because the alternative would be to sit down and negotiate a two-state solution, none of which excuses the barbarism of Hezbollah or Hamas. But the words of the Jordanian foreign minister are pertinent, because he certainly doesn't hold any warm feelings towards them. The plight of the civilians, many of whom have spent their entire lives in refugee camps. There are people in this part of the world who were born in them and whose parents were born in de facto refugee camps. So the idea that the latest assault upon Lebanon or the return of fire into Israel is going to help them seems to me to be even further pie in the sky. So, what do you think the plan is? What do you think the narrative is? If you had the opportunity to ask an Israeli official, as the Jordanian foreign minister would like to do, what they think the longer-term objective is here, what do you think they'd say? What would you say? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. 19 minutes after 10, Israeli troops crossed the Lebanese border. Fire is being returned. Sirens are going off in Tel Aviv. I don't know when an incursion becomes an invasion. I'm always slightly confused by some of the vocabulary, some of the deployment of language. William Hague in the Times today is not confused. He describes the events of 1982 and 2006 in the context of what is happening today as invasions, and he reminds us that they didn't go well. The words of that British statesman, alongside the words of the Jordanian statesman, whose clip I played a moment ago, inform my question to you this morning, which is, what's the end game? What's the plan? And if you think that's a silly question, or you think that the answer is obvious, then just remember Iraq. And in fact, remember what Joe Biden said immediately after October the 7th, when he warned against letting it become another 9/11. I wasn't entirely sure what he meant by that. In that specific moment, it took me about 10 minutes to realise that using it as a jump lead, as a starting point to undertake a round of retaliation or revenge, again, words are important, they mean slightly different things, that would end up completely disproportionately dwarfing the original atrocity, which is probably a fair analysis of what 9/11 did with regard to Afghanistan and then later Iraq. Quick word from Adrian in Dorset, who I fear is perilously close to making the most accurate and pertinent contribution of the morning when he writes, "Good luck with this one, James. You're in for a kicking from both sides." Plus ça change, Adrian. Plus ça change. Jim's in Lanark. Jim, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Hi, thanks for taking the call.
You're very welcome.
So I don't believe that the state of Israel, and I use the word state as they refer to it themselves, they don't refer to it as a country because they don't. As a country, you need to define your borders. The state of Israel has never defined its actual borders because they actually believe that the state of Israel should not just be the Palestinian and Israeli areas given during 1947, but greater areas, as you've mentioned already, like southern Lebanon, like Jordan, like parts of Syria, and that the League of Arab Nations have already actually guaranteed peace between the Arab nations and Israel if they will create a state of Palestine. But Israel has no intention of doing so.
And withdraw from the areas of occupation.
Yeah,
I mean, that's of a piece with the clip that I played at the top of the hour. I don't know that the definitions of country and nation move us towards the question of what the end game is here, because Israel from the river to the sea is as implausible, surely, as the eradication of Israel and the establishment of Arab territories from the river to the sea. What I want to dig into what William Hague has pointed out, and B, what that foreign minister has asked. What is the Israeli narrative? What is the Israeli plan? What is the end game here?
I think the end game is they want to take all. They actually tried at the beginning of the incursion into Gaza after October 7th. They tried to persuade Egypt to take all of the people from Gaza into the desert in Egypt, where they would provide billions of dollars to create enclaves within the desert in Egypt. That was their end game as they saw it.
I'm not splitting hairs, Jim, forgive me, but I'm slightly wary of the use of the word "they" in this context. Was that an official government proposal from Benjamin Netanyahu?
Yes, it did come from the Israeli government.
Okay,
the cabinet
because you also had people in the cabinet sort of suggesting they should drop a nuclear bomb on the whole place. So I mean, this is part of the problem of this hideous coalition, which of course contains people convicted of terror offences, something else that many Western commentators seem to be ignorant of. Is that you're not quite sure who's speaking for whom in the kind of examples that you cite. So they're not going to achieve. Well, I don't know. They're not going to say publicly that what we're hoping to achieve is the establishment of Greater Israel. I don't think privately any of them really believe it to be possible, although Netanyahu's words as a younger man possibly challenge that conviction. In the short term, and this is where William Hague's words are important this morning, you're talking about how it was very bad in the longer term, but in the short term, what's the plan?
So, I don't know if you remember that Netanyahu about a year ago spoke at United Nations and he discussed creating an alternative to the Suez Canal, and he actually showed it being bulldozed through, and he had the map showing what he said was the state of Israel, and it included all of the Palestinian territories. So,
but short term, that's not going to happen. Short term, what is the plan?
I think short term they would like to. I think they've hoped that other Arab nations would take all of the Palestinians.
You really do believe that?
Yeah, I do believe that. I honestly believe
there'd be an emptying of certainly of Gaza, but surely not of Lebanon. I mean, Lebanon is a nascent democracy, a fragile democracy.
I think they've already spoken about, in the past week, they've spoken about that they would need to create a buffer zone in southern Lebanon to protect northern Israel.
They've tried that before. That was the situation until 2000, I think.
And it's the same situation as the Golan Heights. So I think they will create the same situation as the Golan Heights in southern Lebanon after this incursion.
Okay, I mean, whether the world sits still on it. So I say the world. I'm talking about America. Almost the rest of the world are very much at odds with the American position. The power that Joe Biden and soon Kamala Harris or Donald Trump will wield in this issue. If there is now a long and drawn out tail to this action, you just don't know what will happen next. But the idea, if you look at it over the course of the last year, the idea that Netanyahu has tested the resolve of America to make any meaningful attempt to stop him, that gathers a little bit of weight, doesn't it? When you think about the latest escalations, the latest developments. Again, I go back to William Hague, a former foreign secretary. He may not be a politician that you like, but he's been around the block. He says what Israel's armed forces and intelligence agencies have done to Hezbollah in the past 2 weeks is so far entirely different to 2006. What we have witnessed is not only an immense shock to Israel's enemies across the region, particularly a stunned Iranian leadership, but also a wake-up call to anyone in the world who hasn't noticed that military technology is moving on at extraordinary speed. So could it be that they are doing the same thing over and over again, but with different equipment in the hope of a different outcome? Naz is in Enfield. Naz, what would you like to say?
I'd like to say that Netanyahu's game is to completely annihilate Palestine and rule it all the time, because it's 40,000, and it's still going on. The world hasn't done anything. They're watching. They're it's like, oh, we'll just see what Israel's going to do. They have to protect themselves. I agree, they have to protect themselves, but is this really protection? They're fueling terrorists for the future. When those children and grandchildren think of what's happened to their country, it was a beautiful country. Palestine was beautiful. It's gone to the ground. And
so he wants to exist in a state of perpetual conflict then, or you think he believes he's capable of actually achieving the goals that you describe? A quick quote from, let me get the date right on this. I think it was late last year, or early this year, forgive me, 21st of January, early this year. I will not compromise on full Israeli security control over the entire area in the west of Jordan. And this is contrary to a Palestinian state, making it clear that he is opposed to both an independent Palestinian state and United States President Joe Biden's stance on the issue. That was back in January, and no one really could argue that things haven't got worse since then.
Yes, so this is what I mean. Netanyahu wants power. He knows once he's not prime minister anymore, he's going to be investigated. So he's doing everything to, sort of like he wants a greater Israel. That's what I think. He wants Judea, Judea. What's it? Samara, I don't know, the places. The
sort of biblical, the Old Testament biblical borders.
Biblical orders. And look, Israel has taken Jerusalem. No one did anything about that. When it was under, when 3 religions were there, they got on really well. But then Israel took Jerusalem as well. I'm just heartbroken how many people are dying. How many, as you said once before to me, how many is too many? How many?
Well, I think we've established that for some people that question is unanswerable. I suppose for the people behind the terror attack of October the 7th, the number of dead was not high enough to satisfy their wildest dreams. And of course, people who defend the killing of 40,000 Palestinians in Gaza are very, very upset. They get very, very angry when you ask them at what point it became a disproportionate response to the October the 7th terror attack, because people very rarely want to say out loud, I don't care how many die, in pursuit of I would argue, the unachievable. And that's the point, isn't it? What is achievable here? It's a bit like having a phone-in about, unicorns. What is the point of this? Well, we're going to capture a flock of unicorns. But everybody knows that's not possible. I don't care. I will shout about unicorns, and I'll call you an anti-unicornite, because the achievement of a flock of unicorns is absolutely our goal and our purpose. And anyone opposed to our pursuit of unicorns is a terrorist sympathiser or an anti-unicornite. It's just silly. You have to have a conversation about what's feasible and what's plausible. And that means telling me why what happened in 1982 and in 2006 doesn't set a precedent for what's likely to happen now, i.e. perpetual warfare with the objective of keeping any prospect of a two-state solution decades away, centuries away, further away, I think, than it's been probably than at any point since 1967. But as I say, there are always people listening who know more about this than I do. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 10:34 is the time. If Netanyahu had a plan, he'd share it so everyone would be asking, so that no one would now be asking, what's the plan? Therefore, there is no plan, or it's such an awful plan that he can't reveal it because the consequences would be unjustifiable to most sane people. Ben writes, both Hamas and Hezbollah are sworn to Israel's destruction in their constitutions. The two-state solution is a Western talking point. Mate, come on. I can't let that pass. That's so demonstrably false that it lets everybody down. And liberal commenters trying to equate a moral equivalent is dishonest as well as disingenuous. Well, what, a moral equivalent between the stated aims of Hamas and the stated belief that there are no such things as innocent people in Gaza, which I've heard from supporters of Israel, members of the administration calling for a nuclear bomb to be dropped upon the place. So I'm afraid it pains everybody who's up to their ears in loyalty in this issue, but there are all sorts of parallels to be drawn when people start killing people, when armed people start killing unarmed people, when innocents start dying in the pursuit of political goals. Of course there are. Let me get one more. This is nice. James, you thick, stupid little man. See, in many ways, this is a more honest contribution than Ben's, because Ben's trying to be clever, pretending that you can't draw any moral equivalent between terrorists calling for the destruction of the state of Israel and members of the Israeli government contending that there's no such thing as an innocent person in Gaza, or calling for a nuclear bomb to be dropped upon the place. If you're trying to be clever, you end up making a fool of yourself. It's much better to go in like this fella and just be completely honest about your bigotries. He writes, you thick, stupid little man. Hezbollah should have stopped firing rockets into Israel, then Israel would not have retaliated. It's very simple, bozo. Come on, Israel, blow the hell out of Hezbollah. Which brings us back to the question that you must have missed, which is how will this time be any different from 1982 and or 2006? And what is the plan? What is the end game? Adam is in Tel Aviv, in Israel. Adam, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Thanks. Great speaking to you. Big fan.
Thank you.
So I'm here in Israel. Most people in Israel would label me left-wing, based on my views of absolutely wanting a two-state solution with full autonomy for the Palestinians. I've always felt that way, and I haven't changed my mind during the war, even though we are here in Israel. But I do at the same time, sadly, think that we do need this war, and I do support the war at the same time. So I have these rather conflicting ideologies, if you will.
Well, they wouldn't be conflicting if you felt that the latter moves the case or the likelihood of the former. If you felt it moved it forward, your position would be unimpeachable. But I'm interested in whether or not that is what you think.
I think, I know this always sounds very clinical, but I think if we can, and I don't think removing or eliminating is the correct word. And I think my government and actually foreign governments have done a bad job when we said Israel's objective is to destroy Hamas or destroy Hezbollah. Like you say with your unicorn analogy, it's not possible. But what we do need to do, and I think we have done quite successfully, certainly with Hamas, is decapitate them to a level of impotency that, yes, they may still exist ideologically and even at some level militarily, but not in the ability. I mean, we've here in Tel Aviv and in the south of Israel, we've had almost no missiles from Hamas, in the last few months, and their capability to attack us has gone. Can it come back in the future? Absolutely. That's a whole other conversation. But the fact is, militarily, there are objectives that Israel is and will complete. What we then need to do, and this is where I'll go back to my left wing.
So just to pause you. I mean, I think in the last report I saw on this was in June, so not that long ago, and the estimate there from the Council on Foreign Relations was that Hamas still had between 9 and 12,000 fighters, about half of what it had at the start, about 12 to 15 battalions. I also have to wonder whether if you were right and that was wrong, or if the situation had changed measurably between June and October, that's a case for stopping. That's a case for a ceasefire. If Hamas really have been curtailed in the way that you described, then you'd have to be calling for a ceasefire in Gaza while also urging on the invasion of Lebanon. So you're right, your position is quite complicated.
Yeah. Well, I would say that the job's not done yet.
Right.
We need to ensure not only that they stop temporarily, they're sort of on the ropes, if you will, but that we actually remove the ability for them to continue and to regroup and to do it again.
And how feasible do you think that is? In the context of the two-state solution that you want? Because if I take Netanyahu's vision of Israeli security control over the whole of Gaza, turning it essentially into another left bank, I can see how that might hold temporarily until the next atrocity or the next attack or the next act of vengeance. But the idea that it's and then you speak to the Jordanian foreign minister's point about the enmity, the resentment that is now being stored up for generations to come.
Yes. Well, so I mean, as you know more than anyone, there's a lot to unpack here, and it is extremely complicated.
Sure.
And a lot of the time, multiple things that appear to be conflicting are all true at the same time.
Yes.
I agree that everything we're doing at the moment builds resentment at best and violence at worst for the future. I agree with it. It is a correct statement. However, when you
go on, sorry.
Yeah, I'll just say yeah. However, when you are faced with a clear and present immediate
to do
threat,
something, you've got to.
You have no choice.
Yeah.
No, but I'm saying you have to do something. I'm saying Israel right now cannot say, well, you know what, let's leave Hamas and Hezbollah because they're pretty bad today.
Well, I mean, except again, you come back to the 57 Arab states that the Jordanian foreign minister professed to speak for, saying get out of the occupied territories.
Yeah, I'm not sure he is.
Well, that's convenient. That's convenient. He's at least as honest a broker as anybody else in this mix. And in fact it's a precedent. It has been offered. The Arab League and I think United Nations members have promised or pledged to safeguard peace for Israel if they get out of the occupied territories. That's the problem, isn't it, Adam? Isn't it always going to come back to that? Isn't it always going to come back to where the disagreement over where Israel has a right to be?
Well, let me put to you all.
I'd rather you answered my question.
Yeah, so the same Arab League that are making that claim are also the same Arab League who many of their members have complicitly and directly supported Hamas and Hezbollah.
Yeah, I may have misspoken when I said Arab League. I meant sort of the Arab coalition that the foreign minister of Jordan was talking about. So forgive me for that. Let me move you to that question about when they say withdraw from the occupied territories and we will guarantee peace in the region, and then they don't. Then the case that you're making becomes uncontestable. But if they do,
how many Israeli lives? How many Israeli lives do we have to risk? I mean, we're talking about
how many Arab lives do we have to lose in the meantime? And we're back to that thing where you don't see yourself in this space, but we are back to the place where one life is worth more than another, depending upon your own loyalties and origins.
Not at all.
I think so. Forgive me if I'm doing you a disservice.
No, this is an interesting point, and of course, this is bigger than you and I, and the people listening need to hear all these sides. So I enjoy the conversation, so no problem at all. But there are things that we can legitimately discuss and even criticize Israel for, just like any nation state. Past, present, and future policies are all up for discussion, criticism, and even anger.
But they're not. Is it still fair to describe it as the current cabinet deserving of the description of a normal nation state with terrorist convictions on the CVs of some of its members, and long histories of extremism and obvious racism, professed beliefs in things that I think you and I would both describe as disgusting if they were happening in another government anywhere else in the world.
I agree.
Right.
I agree. I did not vote for this government, and I certainly won't. So I'm against this government, as you know and have reported on extensively. Half the country is. So I agree. I would, however, say that we don't want to judge the government by its extreme elements. I mean, the comments made about nuclear bombs and this, that, and the other.
We judge the Palestinian people by the actions and the words of Hamas.
Well,
that's a much graver injustice for some poor soul in Gaza who hates Hamas is being told by Israeli politicians that they deserve to die and can't possibly be innocent because of what Hamas have done.
Well, James, you hit the nail on the head. There's words and there's actions. The words from certain members of the Israeli government are ridiculous, and when they use
the actions are pretty bad too, Adam. The actions are pretty bad too.
They're not the same as the words. No one is taking a nuclear bomb to Gaza, and it's not even an option. It's just ridiculous, right? Those comments.
But they've killed 40,000 people. They've killed 40,000 people. And that is built upon the conviction. But that's built upon the conviction that there is no such thing as innocent people in Gaza.
No, that's not true. No.
It's how it looks to me.
It may well, but the people that have died. They fall into two categories, and again, it's really not nice to have to clinically label people. But for the purposes of the conversation, you'll forgive me.
Of course,
the terrorists who we're actively pursuing, and unfortunately, and I hate this term, everyone does, and the collateral damage of those people that are embedded, or the other way around, that the terrorists have embedded within the Gaza population. Gaza is an extremely crowded area.
All civilians are collateral damage if you split enough hairs, including Israeli ones.
Correct. Absolutely. Well, no, it's a difference. The collateral damage is usually. Let me explain. Collateral damage is usually refers to when your target is not the one.
Yeah, but you're showing enormous faith in the Israeli military operation, so they're just not very good. Then that's why so many innocent people have died. So they've tried really, really hard. They've tried really, really hard to kill only terrorists, but they've accidentally killed anywhere between 25 and 30,000 civilians.
Well, when you're operating in an area of 2 million people in a tiny geographical location, actually that is a small number. But again, any number is too big. Okay. Any number is too big.
But it's small and too big at the same time. If they were hiding in Israel, I suspect they'd have used much more sophisticated technology to target the terrorists, wouldn't they?
Well, if they're hiding in Israel and the places they were hiding in Israel were run by them, supported by them...
No, they're hiding. They're hiding. They don't know where they are. They're hiding. So you'd have to think, you'd hold your fire, wouldn't you, until you were absolutely certain that you were only going to get the target. You wouldn't accommodate the necessity of epic collateral damage, or, as I prefer to call it, carnage.
It's all relative to the numbers. 2 million people in Gaza, and so for Israel to be able to pick, Hamas is embedded in every corner of Gaza. Every corner.
I know. And in conclusion, how lonely is your position on the two-state solution now? I mean, you opened by describing your position of being quite left-wing by the standards of many Israelis. I think where the conversation has subsequently gone will have left people quite shocked by that description, although I understand its accuracy. How lonely is the support for the two-state solution among ordinary people that you encounter? Because Netanyahu is explicitly opposed to it, and so are many of his key allies currently.
Well, so I think extremism breeds extremism, but at a political level as well as
how lonely is your position on this? Because it seems to me to have moved further away than ever from likelihood as a consequence of Israel's actions as much as anybody else's. So when you call for a two-state solution, how much of that is words and how much of that is conviction, belief that it could actually happen?
Everyone... So for me personally, it's 100% conviction. And unfortunately, my conviction is not enough. But when I speak to Israelis, even the most right-wing Israelis, they all say the same thing. We want peace. We want a two-state solution. We don't want war, but there's no one on the other side to trust. It's very, very simple. In any type of negotiation...
That's very convenient.
However,
and the words of the Jordanian foreign minister will be ringing in many ears, as will the image of the map that eradicates the modern state of Jordan and constitutes an ambition for members of
again, you're taking
Netanyahu's cabinet.
There is no one in the Israeli government at any serious weight or any serious support.
Well, that's very convenient. So you can't trust anybody else, and the ones in the Israeli government who look really toxic, you've got to ignore them as well. So who do we trust then?
Judge it based on the actions.
Well, I am. We're even arguing about the actions and the necessity or otherwise of them. But thank you for your contribution and indeed for your civil tone, even as we can disagree intelligently. I sometimes worry, as I'm sure you do, Adam, about whether or not we're being a little bit, and you're obviously a lot closer to the action than I am in Tel Aviv, but when we pat each other on the back for being polite, I do worry sometimes that it almost ignores the seriousness of what's actually happening outside the realm of conversation. But to say that perhaps is to denigrate diplomacy itself. It's coming up to 10 to 11. Honest Bob Jenrick has made some extraordinary comments about UK Special Forces, killing suspects rather than capturing them, based upon the grounds that he believes that the European Convention of Human Rights would somehow scupper the process of justice in the event of them being captured. And the former Attorney General and former Conservative MP Dominic Grieve has weighed in on what appears to me to be a quite extraordinary breach of diplomatic convention. We'll find out a little bit more after this. 10:53 is the time. Robert Jenrick, probably the front runner in the Conservative leadership election, Conservative leadership battle currently, of course, reaching fever pitch at the conference in Birmingham. And I mean, possibly leading the Tory party towards an electoral cycle spent fighting with reform over who can say the most outrageous things about immigration in general or refugees in particular. But he recorded a short film yesterday or the day before, which has prompted a really powerful response from Dominic Grieve, the former Attorney General and Conservative MP, going so far as to describe it as, I'll let him tell you himself. Just have a listen to this little bit first.
The court is also why illegal migration is out of control. It's created an arsenal of rights for illegal migrants that are used to gum up our courts and prevent their removal. Our special forces are killing rather than capturing terrorists because our lawyers tell us that if they're caught, the European court will set them free.
Dominic Grieve has described it as a nasty propaganda video and picked holes in various elements of it, but it's that one that I want to ask him about first. Is that a reality you recognise, Dominic? Good morning.
Good morning. No, I don't. The idea that the European Convention on Human Rights is facilitating murder on the battlefield, I'm just astonished. It isn't. There is actually a case back in some years ago, I think around 2015, called Hassan on the United Kingdom, which was about whether the European Convention on Human Rights in some way overrode international humanitarian law, that's the law of war, and prevented you doing battlefield detention and taking prisoners of war. And it said emphatically it did not. It had to be read together. So this suggestion that special forces are one reason why special forces might kill the people that they're seizing in combat or on combat operations is the ECHR is just nonsense. I just found that one of the more astonishing of his comments.
I mean, it also portrays British forces as war criminals.
Yes, it does. And that, I think, is outrageous. I well remember when we had the Overseas Operations Bill, I'm afraid the product of the last Conservative government, how outraged army officers were at the suggestion that there should be different standards for the army from anybody else in terms of being answerable for their actions. The UK forces do not kill their prisoners, and if people in UK forces do kill their prisoners, then the full force of the law should be brought on them.
I hesitate to ask you to do this, but where do you think this has come from? What? I mean, can you see any threads that perhaps he has tied together erroneously?
Well, he may have tied one thread together erroneously, and that is that when we were operating in Afghanistan in the early 2000s, and indeed it may have continued for some time thereafter, there was an issue that under Afghan law, if you took somebody on the battlefield or you arrested them, you could only detain them for 96 hours, or then you either had to charge or release them.
Right.
But that was a problem with Afghan law. It wasn't a problem with the European Convention on Human Rights.
I see. But even that possibly is generous in trying to work out what has gone on in the dark recesses of Robert Jenrick's mind. Is this, and forgive me, I mean, we're talking about matters potentially of life and death, and also the very cynical and deliberate painting of targets upon the backs of British special forces in some senses. So, but you are the vice president of the European movement, and if we're trying to work out what's going on here, it's a bit Brexity, isn't it? He's just telling lies about something that he is campaigning to get out of.
Yes, because the whole thing is rubbish, because his other big pitch, bigger pitch, I think, is saying get rid of the European Convention on Human Rights and it'll be perfectly easy to deal with illegal or irregular immigration. But that's rubbish too. I mean, the people who are coming here land on our beaches. That's got nothing to do with the European Convention on Human Rights. Once they're here, some of them claim asylum. Well, if they get asylum, they're entitled to stay. That's not the European Convention. It's the UN Convention on the Rights of Refugees and our own national law. Some of them are then very difficult, who don't get asylum. You can't send them back. Why can't you send them back? Nothing to do with the ECHR, for the most part. It's because the countries from which they come won't take them back or won't cooperate, and because they've destroyed their documentation. So even viewed from his point of view, he's making a pitch that he cannot deliver on. Because if he were to get rid of the ECHR, the problem would be continuing exactly the same way as it is today, unless you find some other means of dealing with the current migration crisis.
And these are problems that every other country in the world that takes in refugees also has to contend with. Do you think he knows that?
Yes, I'm sure he knows that. He's been the immigration minister. I mean, that's what really makes me angry about this. He has been surrounded by officials who will have been telling him over the time that he was the immigration minister exactly what the problems were and where the pinch points come. And I accept that people do use the ECHR. They invoke it under the Human Rights Act sometimes to have court hearings. Of course, I accept that. But it's frankly a drop in the ocean compared to the major problem on illegal immigration, which is the things I've just described. And he must know that.
And yet he believes that this rhetoric or dishonesty will appeal to the members of the party to which you dedicated your political career.
Yes, and that worries me too. And at the very end of the video, there's a very nasty little piece when there's a sort of, I don't know whether it's a put-up job or it's taken off the internet or whether it's true or whether it's a bot, but it's a sort of immigrant looking gloatingly as he sort of chucks out banknotes.
Gosh.
And I look at this and I think, well, that's just stirring up hatred against immigrants, most of whom, when they come here, by whatever means, actually try to earn an honest penny. So it's a most extraordinary, nasty piece of propaganda that he's put out.
But it possibly does enhance his chances of being the next leader of the Conservative Party.
Well, it may. And that, I'm afraid, will be a very bad reflection on the Conservative Party, both his parliamentary colleagues, who ought to be a wake-up call. What are we about to land ourselves with here? And secondly, the membership, who actually, on the whole, I think can be quite sensible. But they ought to wake up to what this particular offer is all about from Mr. Jenrick. Because the risk to them is that the Conservative Party just drifts off into complete irrelevance. That's the fate that is going to come their way, with more and more reasonable people just hemorrhaging out.
Do you have a preference among his rivals?
No, I don't. I think that they are all capable of doing a reasonable job. I worry sometimes about some of the things they say, but I'm alive to the realities of politics. I happen to think that they are all decent people. And what I'm absolutely sure of is they would all be infinitely better than Mr. Jenrick.
So you've got three equals and then a fourth. You've got 3 in first equal and then a fourth place for Mr. Jones.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily quite say that, but I'm not voting anyway because I don't have a vote.
No.
I know 2 of them much better than I know the third. Okay. I know James Cleverly and I know Tom Tugendhat better than I know Kemi Badenoch, but that's simply because we've been in Parliament for longer and also pre-parliamentary contacts.
Yes.
So, but all of them seem to me to have a sense of propriety. I've been pleased when I've seen some of them stand up to what I would call the sort of not bending with the wind at every conceivable suggestion of a gimmick. So Kemi Badenoch made quite clear that she thought the ECHR was irrelevant to this leadership election, and I applaud her for that. And all of them, I think, have the capacity to take the Conservative Party in the right direction. But it is regrettable, and I made that point before, that all of them, to an extent, have to play to the gallery of a party which I'm afraid is no longer in its membership representative of the people who are voting for it or who have been voting for it. And that, in the long run, if this continues, is going to be a really serious problem for them.
And finally, Dominic Grieve, in the annals of interventions from colleagues past and present that your eyebrows have raised at over the course of your political career, or worse, perhaps, your stomach has turned, where does Robert Jenrick's little film sit?
I think it's at the top. I think it's the nastiest piece of work I've seen. And obviously I was very critical of Boris Johnson on a large number of things. That was mainly because I considered him to be a charlatan and he was very dishonest. But he was irresponsible. But there's something really nasty about this particular little piece of Jenrick propaganda.
You must get off that fence, Dominic Grieve.
Well, I could always try.
Yes, thank you. Dominic Grieve, former Attorney General, and I always think something of an exemplar of the kind of Conservative that was dispensed with on Boris Johnson's watch. 3 minutes after 11 is the time. 6 minutes after 11, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I turn our attention next. We've touched on this once before, and I didn't necessarily come away any more enlightened from the conversation than I went into it. So, medical royal colleges now have joined the clamour regarding something called physician associates. They want an independent review into whether the growing use of physician associates puts NHS patients at risk. It's got quite acrimonious now, this row. I don't know that the level of acrimony is necessarily an indicator of the necessary level of concern, and I speak, as you know, very much as a patient rather than as a medic. So I see acrimony, and I see some people in the medical profession for whom I have the utmost respect expressing serious concern about the increasing popularity and prevalence of associates who assist doctors but do not have a medical degree. The BMA is among those arguing that physician associates are now working outside of their training and are being used to replace doctors. They have warned that this could lead to deaths, but the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges has intervened to say that some doctors are not being entirely honest about things and spreading, I quote, huge amount of misinformation. And this refers to the acrimony that we've seen on social media. They describe a destructive debate that they describe as damaging working relationships in hospitals. So that is something that I'm interested in, is what the acrimony... Is it possible that things were tootling along quite nicely on the physician associate front, but, as is often the case, a social media-based brouhaha has thrown everything into disarray? Or are you capable of making clear the real problems here? It's essentially, if it's a battle between the British Medical Association and the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges, then the rest of us, the patients, the ordinary people who rely upon these people for our health and our care, we've got a bit of a problem. So that's 24 medical royal colleges in the UK and Ireland have written collectively to Wes Streeting, Health Secretary, and Amanda Pritchard, Chief Executive of NHS England, calling for an independent rapid review to clarify claims around the safety and usefulness of PAs, while warning that the current conversation was devoid of factual information. They write, increasingly, these claims, which often focus on patient safety or restricting access to training opportunities for junior doctors, are becoming part of a wider narrative. So, how worried should I be? That's a little self-referential, isn't it? Stop talking about yourself, James. How worried should we be? You are a doctor, or you are a nurse, or perhaps you're a patient with a pertinent experience, or perhaps most helpfully, or certainly helpfully, you are a physician associate. How worried should we be about the rise of this phenomenon? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. I used to think, I've got a complete... Do you ever realise you've been wrong about something forever? I used to think that white coat syndrome was the process of putting too much trust in doctors. I don't know where I got that idea from. I think someone told me once and I just ran with it. So I used to think that, because it's like you never ask for a second opinion, I just trust a doctor. The doctor tells me something, I'll just believe it. That's what I thought white coat syndrome was. And then I had a blood pressure test a few months ago and it was quite high. I was quite worried. And the doctor said, oh, don't worry, it could be white coat syndrome. Do it again when you go home. I did it again when I went home. I was smack in the middle of the healthy zone. And white coat syndrome was a sense of hypertension. The fear of being in the doctor's... I didn't even know I was fearful of being in the doctor's surgery. I was a little bit worried about what you're going to find out. And that had made my blood pressure go up. So white coat syndrome refers to that. And it's often quite specific to blood pressure or hypertension. So it's not what I thought it was, because I was about to cite white coat syndrome and say, if physician associates are really bad for us, like genuinely bad for us, why on earth would they be doing it? Literally, it defies the Hippocratic Oath. Unless it's happening for more complicated reasons that you could explain to me. I understand that it's obviously cheaper. You've got someone doing a job who hasn't got a medical degree. That is going to be cheaper and perhaps easier to fill vacancies than it is if a medical degree is a prerequisite. But I'm fairly sure, remember, I'm the devil's advocate on this one. I haven't got a side at this point in proceedings, except the side of people that want the best possible NHS, which is a side I used to think everyone was on until I found out a little bit more about Tufton Street. So the mystery for me is why people whose professional credo is first do no harm would actually be complicit in something that is bad for patients. That's what I meant by white coat syndrome. Oh, I can't believe that the medical profession would go down a path that was hazardous or dangerous or damaging. And that's the question I've got for you. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Valerie says if it wasn't for social media, this wouldn't have been exposed. But I'm wondering what has been exposed. There must be a case for deploying people to do things that don't demand a medical degree who haven't got a medical degree. So what is the point at which I should be worried? And I am prepared to be worried. Let me make that absolutely clear. And if I had to pick a side, as it were, I would probably defer to people in the medical profession for whom I have the utmost respect and who are expressing grave concerns about this. So, two questions. What is going on? 0345 6060 973. And how worried should we be? 0345 6060 973. The number is the same in both cases. The NHS, there was a tragic death in November of 2022 when a physician associate had misdiagnosed a young woman called Emily Chesterton on two separate occasions at a GP practice in Crouch End, North London. If I were to pull on my devil's advocate outfit in earnest, I would point out that GPs often misdiagnose things as well, but that isn't the beginning or the end of the conversation. More than 25 fellows of the Royal College of Physicians wrote to the Times last week urging the government to pause plans for a mass expansion of so-called PAs. They want an inquiry to be set up by the Health and Social Care Committee and for a national scope of practice to be established, limiting what PAs can do. So we're back to what is going on. 27 fellows of the Royal College of Physicians signing that, and that's the oldest medical college in England, as well as GPs and leading hospital consultants. So what is going on and how worried should we be? If you hit the numbers now, you will get through. It's a conversation specifically about physician associates and about an apparent tension between the British Medical Association and the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges, both of which are institutions which I think, we would like to trust. But when they're at loggerheads with each other about an issue entirely pertaining to the care of patients, it's quite alarming, isn't it? And you kind of need to know where the truth lies or where the facts lie. And if you think you can help me out, you know what to do. It's just coming out to 11:15. That number, once again, is 0345 6060 973. Very poignant interview, actually, with Emily Chesterton's parents on Good Morning Britain the other day, where they told Susanna and Ed Balls that she thought she was seeing a doctor. Sent away with a wrong diagnosis. It happened twice, but she thought she was seeing a doctor. So that's obviously suboptimal. And the other story in the news that is relevant to the conversation that we're about to have about physician associates involves Alder Hey Hospital in Liverpool, which has had a benighted history in recent years, and revelations that physician associates who are not trained or classed as professional witnesses had replaced senior paediatricians in the examination of child abuse victims. And of course, if you're not trained or classed as a professional witness and you are conducting that assessment, it opens the door, as many doctors on social media have pointed out, it potentially jeopardizes subsequent prosecutions of abusers. So there's a heck of a lot going on here, and I would like to understand the issue rather more than I do currently. Ram is in Durham. Ram, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I've always wanted to speak to you. You're probably one of my most favourite left-leaning presenters.
Thank you.
It's a real pleasure to speak to you.
That's a fairly narrow field, left-leaning presenters in Brexit Britain, but I'll take the compliment. Thank you.
Like I always enjoy it. Well, I've got a philosophical view on this, and of course 3 key points, and hopefully we can dissect this. But I'm a consultant within the NHS, and it takes an average of about 10 to 15 years from medical school all the way till being a consultant. That's the minimum time.
Yeah.
But a lot of people think that the path from medical school all the way to being a consultant is just the acquisition of knowledge and competencies. But there is a philosophical bent to this, and the philosophical bent is moving from I don't know what I don't know to I now know I don't know everything. And
you sound a bit like Donald Rumsfeld at this point.
But what you want, the safest doctors out there are doctors who know their limitations and know when they don't know something. And that is something that's hardwired into us over that 15 years. So the good doctors have that view. You do not want an arrogant doctor or a Mr. Know-it-all or a Miss Know-it-all.
No.
So, and unfortunately, the training that is required to be a physician's associate does not give them the privilege of that time to develop that.
So what's the career curve for a PA then?
I think usually, if I'm not mistaken, they're all required to have a basic degree in something, usually in the sciences. So they all need a university degree. So in terms of acquisition of knowledge, they should probably have the basics. Then I think it's about 2 or 3 years as a physician associate. They spend a lot of time in the hospital. But that's just not enough. That's still about 6 or 7 years compared to.
And how do you respond to my naive contention that the people in charge of the NHS wouldn't do something consciously or knowingly jeopardising patient safety? And well, I know we've got anomalous examples of appalling wrongdoing, but I'm thinking of an institutional.
Oh, absolutely. So, from an institutional point of view, I've got to be careful what I say.
Of course.
We are, the NHS is pressured. We are at breaking point, and you and I can agree and probably disagree on how it got to that.
Yes.
But there were multiple factors. And the NHS has always been very reactive, not proactive.
Yes.
And they're always trying to solve problems. And when you've got managers and hospital staff and decision makers saying, look, we need to solve this problem, they sometimes have to go with the easiest solution as a stopgap, not thinking of the long game. And that long game is, sometimes it is patient safety. Now, I do know a lot of non-doctors who have extended roles in my field, and they're absolutely excellent. They're really, really good in my experience. But the difference is they know when they don't know something, and they will come and we work as a team. I think the three key things that you need to consider, and I think a lot of the Royal Colleges and the BMA, they're not opposed to PAs. What they are proposing is, number one, clear definition of their training pathways and competencies. Number two, clear definition of their roles. And this has to be signed up by the hospitals, by whoever is supervising this associate. And number three, public engagement. The public need to know who is treating them. They have a right to ask.
That's why this case in Crouch End is so troubling, isn't it? Because this poor woman thought she was seeing a GP. I mean, a GP could misdiagnose a pulmonary embolism, presumably, or not?
Of course, everyone makes mistakes. And, some of them are preventable, some of them are not preventable.
Yeah.
But one of the key aspects of the NHS that is, and a lot of people don't realize, but the NHS is respected internationally. And one of the reasons is how we look at our mistakes. We do it. Yes, sometimes we don't do it well, but we certainly do it a darn better than a lot of other countries and how we
So I don't want to break it down to such a simplistic, well, it's too late now because I'm about to. On a scale of 1 to 10, and I understand the difference between the live concerns about the phenomenon in general and live concerns about the way it is currently being implemented. That's a crucial distinction that you've made. But given the current state of play, on a scale of 1 to 10, how worried should the average person be?
I think at a 7 to 8.
Oh, Lord.
They should be worried.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Let me read you something just quickly, and then I'll ask you to respond. It's anonymous, so I don't know what perspective this is coming from. PAs have been around for over 20 years. The recent case of a missed DVT was an error, but in the support offered by the GPs. However, there is also the case of a GP in Ayrshire who missed DVT in an exact presentation, and the patient also died. There are less than 4,000 PAs working in the NHS. This is protectionism by doctors. You don't go to Tesco and expect the chairman of the board to walk on the checkouts to take your money. Why should a GP, the most expensive resource, see every sniffle? PAs are trained to spot things outside of their scope and send it up the chain if there are problems. This is a confected row connected to the doctors' strike for more money.
I completely disagree with that. And the reason is, we've worked with extended health practitioners for over 30 to 50 years.
Yes.
We've got fantastic nurses who have extended their role in multidisciplinary team meetings, running clinics of their own. I mean, even in my GP practice, sometimes I see one of my advanced practice nurses. Doctors have no problems with those. Same in the world of radiology and in surgery. You have practitioners who have extended their role, but the difference is experience. They've gone through a certain training and pathway. They've worked with the team, and a lot of them then extend their role. So it is not protectionism, because doctors have always comfortably worked with people.
And although we're all gaining experience all the time, the point you're making is about the amount that you need to get into the job in the first place.
Experience is key in healthcare. And I come back down to that philosophical point I said. The difference between, I think, the length of training for physician associate compared to, let's say, an advanced practice nurse or an advanced practice radiographer or anyone extending their role. The difference is experience and knowing when you don't know something.
Knowing what you don't know. And that's like a flat curve then. So I see... people often balk at the length of time that doctors train for. It's why the phrase junior doctors is sometimes quite unhelpful in this context, because as you've reminded us, that is what you are until you essentially become a consultant. Whereas for a physician associate, you are going to accrue knowledge and experience the more that you do your job, but you don't need it to get the job.
Absolutely. And I think it really comes down to that. Again, for me, it's not just about the acquisition of knowledge and skills. It is that awareness of knowing the limitations.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like protectionism to me, but you recognise that there is room for them in the NHS. We're just worried that they're expanding to fill a space that is empty for the wrong reasons.
I'm not against having physician assistant. I'm not against. Like I said, as long as this three will support, number one, there's a clear training pathway for them with clear supervision. Number two, their roles and responsibilities are clearly identified.
Yeah. And that should concern everybody. Even the most passionate advocate of physician associates should be deeply concerned if those three criteria are not being met. Ram, thank you so much. And as Callum points out to the anonymous texter in defence of physician associates, getting the wrong change at the till is unlikely to kill you. That is very true. 26 minutes after 11, although the same texter also pointed out that GPs can make the same misdiagnosis that led to the death of Emily Chesterton in November of 2022. John's in Birmingham. John, what would you like to say?
Hi, I'm a GP. I work in a part of a large PCN, so a primary care network in Birmingham.
Okay.
And I look after the PAs that work for our PCN. We're a group of about 10 different practices. There's a lot of points I want to make. I'm going to try and sort of break it down and hopefully it'll make some sort of sense. So, yes, people say that PAs have been around for a long time, but they haven't been around in general practice for a long time.
Right.
Now, the nature of our work in general practice is I don't know what's coming through the door. Patients come in. It could be anything from sniffle to a DVT to whatever.
Yes. That's the nature of the GP's practice, isn't it?
That is.
Yes.
Is. Hopefully we can weed out the severe chest pains and redirect them to hospital before they kind of get worse. So what we see is undifferentiated patients, and you need a lot of skill and experience to kind of be able to be safe in approaching that. Now, as the last caller mentioned, PAs come out of university after a 3-year degree, and because of the last government's push for PCNs, where they took a load of money from the GP contracts, they said in order to earn it back, you've got to work collaboratively in these PCN groups. And a portion of that money, for you to get it back, you could only spend it on certain people, such as PAs.
Oh, okay. So there was a financial imperative to the proliferation of physician associates.
There was. So money was.
It doesn't necessarily make it a bad thing, but it certainly illuminates the issue for me. Yeah.
But I'm getting there. So for an average practice, they were losing the equivalent of maybe 1.5 full-time equivalent GPs, salary GPs worth of income to put in this PCN to work together. Now, I'm not against working together. We do our COVID jabs together, we do our flu jabs together, and a lot of the working together has been good. But where we have been told that you have to hire a PA who earns out of university around 50 grand a year, if zero, okay, and you consider your average so-called junior doctor will earn 30-ish,
yes,
okay, when they start. That automatically you're not gonna, and then what are they going to do? That's the next question. So they turn up, but you've got PA. What can they do? Well, you get them in general practice to see undifferentiated patients without any experience, which means the supervising doctor who holds legal responsibility when things go wrong, it falls on us, the supervising doctor. So a lot of us now, after all these cases that have happened, they're saying, okay, we need to be a little bit better with our supervision, which means I have to see every patient, which means I have to talk to you about every patient at the same time as me seeing my own patients.
So it's made your job harder?
It's made my job a lot harder. They will send some patients home, so I try not to let them see disease. I try not to let them see mental health, because you need a lot of skill with all of that. About 3 or 4 weeks ago...
Forgive, this is a silly question. Well, it's not a silly question, but they could develop that skill. I mean, the conversation has got two strands, hasn't it? There's a conversation about the shortness of the journey to patient consultations, but if they have been in the job for a long time, albeit that we might not be comfortable with the brevity of the training period, if they've been in the job for a long time, they will have developed some of the skills that you're worried about them not having.
I don't dispute, but what you have to understand is that at the point in time where we're saying that NHS is strapped for cash, you're having to employ someone who will take 2 or 3 times as long, so they get 25 or 20, 30-minute appointment to see a patient. So when you look at that 50 grand that I'm paying them for 30-minute appointments, even if you push them down to 20 minutes, if I had that same money and I was able to employ whoever I chose, i.e. I would always choose a GP over a PA, 1, because they're responsible for themselves. I don't have to supervise them. 2, they can prescribe. 3, having been through medical school, junior doctor training, and got the CT in general practice, they're then able to work independently, and I expect a basic level of
I get it.
function.
Okay, I'm gonna run out of time. So in your words, why have they done this then?
They've done this because there was a concern about capacity in the NHS. There's concerns about doctors
So they
leaving.
thought that this would make it easier to get a GP appointment. They thought this would make it to get an appointment in the building where the GPs are.
Correct, and it's wrong. I'm dead against it.
You are, aren't you?
And I've seen the harm it's done. Once tried to send a patient home who clearly had appendicitis, and talked to me about the patient. And I said, no, I must see the patient.
Right.
Grabbed the back knife, examined it. It was pretty obvious. I said, well, and this was someone that's been with us for pretty much 18 months as a PA working amongst different practices. So they're getting a variety
So
of
you had
experience.
no choice financially but to do it, but you recognised that it was introduced in order to increase capacity in what we still call a GP surgery by massively increasing the likelihood of us not being seen by a GP, which means the more conscientious a GP you are, the worse your working life has become, because you're now operating as both treatment supplier and supervisor.
Before we finish, one of the consequences of this has been because our funding has been taken, we've been told you can only spend it on certain things.
Yes.
That's why you have so many GPs now out of work. Now, who would have thought that 5, 6, 7 years ago?
Oh, there's the final piece of the jigsaw. And people may not be aware of this, but the number of actual qualified GPs who can't find work. I suppose we need to leave a couple of gaps in the jigsaw, don't we, John? So why would you not hire them instead? Oh, because you're not allowed to pay them, even though you'd be paying them less under the... Oh, what a tangled web they weave. Thomas Watts has your headlines. It is 11:35. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Of course, one element of the unfolding situation in Lebanon is the plight of people who can't get out, people who are trapped there. Foreign Office advice, well, in some senses, barely touching the sides. We will talk in about 15 minutes' time, maybe slightly more, slightly less, 12 and a half minutes' time, if you're counting, to, oddly enough, a British Lebanese NHS consultant who divides his time between London, UK, and London, Canada, but whose parents are currently trapped in Lebanon. Get an insight into what it's that like. And staying, broadly speaking, with matters medical. I don't know if you were listening last week when we looked upon the abiding impact upon healthcare professionals of treating COVID patients or working during the highest levels of crisis during COVID-19. It was an incredible hour of radio, actually. I can say that because I barely did anything. And many of the cases, it was inspired by the testimony to the inquiry of a doctor who was clearly still traumatised by it. I don't mean that necessarily in a medical sense, although it probably does apply. I just mean in an emotional and in a visible sense. And one of my callers, Angus, described or drew comparisons actually between being on duty for months during the worst days of COVID and being on duty for hours in the immediate aftermath of the July the 7th terror attack on London. And he cited the London Air Ambulance, which I just noted today has had some rather sort of splendid news. The whole service has had some rather splendid news. So Henry Riley, as you may have heard with Nick, has been catching up on that developing story. I thought we'd knit the two together, remind ourselves of what Angus said about why. Just such a sparkling depiction of why they are unique and the role that they play. And that's why news today that their capabilities have been bolstered is so welcome. So Henry will be with us at about 12:45. Before all of that, a couple more calls on physician associates in a moment, but I thought you might need a little giggle given the bleakness of the news agenda at the moment. So Liz Truss has very kindly stepped into the breach. Just a couple of, really, we could play you the whole interview. She was, almost to prove my point about the state of the nation. Liz Truss was being interviewed at the Conservative Party conference by one of the people who is a frequent feature of my Unhinged headline feature on the programme. It's almost as if that unholy trinity of secretly funded lobby groups that call themselves think tanks, absolutely bonkers right-wing commentators, and the politicians that have become their sort of vessels have aligned absolutely perfectly in Birmingham this week, because a lot of people expressed confusion about why the queue for Liz Truss's event was so long, given that presumably most people weren't queuing up for the comedy value. And the answer is really simple. Liz Truss is the apotheosis of the combination of secretly funded lobby groups doing the business of incredibly wealthy individuals and institutions while refusing to tell us who pays their wages, and their fellow travellers in the media, a relationship that has been incredibly carefully cultivated over decades. You can read all about it in How They Broke Britain, one of Waterstone's paperbacks of 2024. And the politician that a lot of people like to see Liz Truss as an aberration. She's not. She's a culmination. So the politician that actually sought to deliver all of their wildest dreams is Liz Truss. So if you are dedicated to the extreme fringes of right-wing commentary or the ecosystem of secretly funded lobby groups pretending to be think tanks, you can't turn away from Liz Truss. You have to keep boosting her. You have to keep pretending that if only things had gone slightly differently, everything would have been brilliant. So she looks unwell. And I don't like saying that because it's such a lazy rhetorical device. If someone holds opinions that you don't agree with or that you can't really argue with, you can accuse them of suffering from a form of derangement syndrome, or you can accuse them of being mentally ill. But Liz Truss doesn't look well as she marches around Birmingham with a sort of rictus grin on her face and refuses to engage with anybody except members of this crazy ecosystem of far-right headbangers, or very right-wing headbangers, not necessarily far-right, because this is more about free markets than racism. So very right-wing headbangers and the secretly funded. And the interplay between the two is constant. It's like a revolving door. And in Liz Truss's brief government, the revolving door had 3 entrances and exits. It would be, right-wing newspaper, lobby group masquerading as think tank, job in Westminster, up to and including Downing Street. And so that's why the queue is very long, because they can't ever contemplate the possibility that she proved their entire life's work is insane. So that's why the queues around the block were long. And that's why they have to keep inflating her when she says things like this.
If you had battled on in your premiership and held on, do you think that a Tory party led by you would have done better than a Tory party led by Rishi Sunak at the last election?
Yes, I do.
Why do you think so?
Because when I was in number 10, Reform was polling at 3%.
Right.
By the time we got to the election, I think they got 18%.
Yeah.
Because we promised change that we didn't deliver.
Liz Truss, they're essentially critiquing her own premiership without referring to anything that she did, which anybody with a memory which is operating currently at anything above 5% of capacity will remember. The catastrophic impact of her so-called mini budget. But, say what you like about Liz Truss, there is one thing she understands, and that's comedy.
I mean, I just think these so-called left-wing comedians just aren't funny. They are in power at the moment. Their people are in power. The left-wing orthodoxy is in power.
Yes.
So their jokes aren't funny.
Right.
Because they're not taking the mick out of the people who actually need their egos punctured.
So Liz Truss there, contending in one breath that she would have won the election despite the catastrophe of her mini budget if she had stayed in power, and then accusing other people of having egos that need puncturing. And the interlocutor, the interviewer there, a Daily Telegraph journalist called Timothy Stanley, who I think currently stands at second place in the all-time Hall of Fame for contributors to our Unhinged headline feature, which we must say is a bit tricky at the moment because they're not in power anymore. But my goodness me, if there was a headline to that interview, it would surely be Unhinged. And the other blast from the past who's popped up at Tory conference this week poses me a rather different problem. I think I might be feeling sorry for Jonathan Gullis. More on that later. Back to the Physician Associates. Nikki's in Hyde. Nikki, what did you want to say?
Hi, I just wanted to refer to your last caller. I think he's hit the nail on the head, really, to be quite honest.
Not hearing much support for the current state of play, then, with regard to these associates.
No. I mean, I kind of I have mixed feelings myself, to be honest, as well. I think it's doubling the amount of work that certainly GPs would have to do if they're having to supervise what they're actually doing. It's just creating more work for themselves. And you'd think, well, would it be more simple to get another junior doctor?
But I mean, there is, and they are
level of pay.
I mean, incredibly, as Ram reminded us, they are unemployed. Actually, no, it was John in Birmingham reminded us that there are junior doctors struggling to find work in the GP sector. What's your perspective? What's your perspective on this, Nikki?
Well, I'm a renal specialist nurse, and I'm also a prescriber. So I've been qualified 13 years.
Right.
And the last 4 years I've had the role extended as such. But I'm not able to actually diagnose any particular problems. I can have an idea as to what's going on, but I would never ever put a plan together without speaking with my senior consultants first. So there's always that safety net aspect in my role. Now, when I'm working with physician associates, we don't directly have any in our team, but there are in teams in pretty much every ward where I work, and they kind of they're doing stuff. They're doing stuff on what the consultants have actually asked for from the ward round, so they would be doing all the odd jobs, should we say.
Yes.
They'd be making the referrals, they'd be ringing various departments to help arrange investigations and things like that. I'm not actually aware that they're allowed to actually prescribe where I work, and I think at the moment, if that was the case, I think in some instances I would feel a little bit worried about that.
So given someone's listening to this, to you and the previous callers, all expressing, to be mild about it, scepticism about the current state of play, and if they were to say, well, why on earth have they done it then? What would your answer be?
Money.
But they cost more.
To be quite honest.
They cost more in the short term than the GP than the junior doctors do, but not in the long term.
Yeah, it's false economy because I guess if you're looking short term, you're looking at pound signs straight in your face. Where if you're looking long term, you're going to be getting experienced doctors who are able to look after these patients, and they're not going to need as much supervision as they go throughout the training. And
I guess the clincher for anybody hoping that my callers are panicking unnecessarily, despite all being heavily involved in the sector, would be the thousands of trained GPs who can't find work. I mean, that's incredible, right? Well, I don't know if it's thousands, as my text I've just read out said, but certainly a significant number. Nikki, thank you. It's 11:46. Apologies. We'll return to this. Simon, Dave, Karen, we will return to this at a later date. I wonder if there's someone we need to talk to. Do we need to have a heated debate in the studio? We love a heated debate. Paraphrasing the late, great Mrs. Merton. I genuinely don't know. But I do know this: you're not impressed by my admission that I'm in danger of feeling sorry for Jonathan Gullis. If we're lucky, I'll have time to explain why before Sheila Fogarty gets here at 1 o'clock. 10 minutes to 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where it's probably fair to say that the situation in Lebanon, in southern Lebanon in particular, will not be the same at 12 noon in 10 minutes' time when the next news bulletin kicks in, as it is now. Fast-moving barely comes close. And this, of course, is the worst of all imaginable worlds for people with family there. Professor Ahmed Hankir is... I got a message from him yesterday, actually, describing what situation his family is currently in, describing the attack on central Beirut and how airstrikes had reduced 2 residential blocks to rubble, and the forcible displacement of his parents from Saida in South Lebanon. And I thought it would be opportune, Ahmed, to find out more from you about what life is like for people in the news headlines and in the stories that are unfolding. So, I mean, how are your parents? Are they okay? When did you last speak to them?
I spoke with them last night, but as I mentioned to you, that was before the development that the Israeli military has launched a ground invasion, which is deeply concerning to say the least.
What are the options or prospects for them? Would you want to get them out? Would it be possible to do so if you did? They're in their 70s, aren't they, your parents?
My father is in his 70s, yes, and he has health and mobility issues. I mean, I want to get them out, and I went to Beirut last month, and I was hoping that I would be able to persuade them, but Lebanon is home, and they are understandably attached to Lebanon. They have family there, they have friends there, but we are fortunate, we are blessed. They are in a relatively safe part of Beirut. They were forcibly displaced from Saida Sidon, but there have been some more attacks, not only in Dahiyeh, which is the suburb of Beirut, but in central Beirut, in Kola, which is a busy interchange. So that makes me feel like nowhere in Beirut is safe, really. They're targeting Christian majority areas, they being the Israeli military. They are targeting beach resorts. They are targeting the roads to the international airport. It doesn't feel like anywhere is safe, James.
I mean, the figures, again, have no doubt been overtaken by events, but more than 700 people dead, including 50 children, and that was late on the 29th of September. Thousands, tens of thousands of people crossing the border from Lebanon into Syria. And, I mean, you know more about the history of the region than I do, Ahmed, but this has happened at least twice before in your father's living memory, if not in ours. What is the likelihood of something going differently this time?
Well, I mean, if previous Israeli invasions are anything to go by, then I have a foreboding that there will be another Gaza in Lebanon, to quote the United Nations Secretary General. So I don't think things will be any different. I mean, in a rather bellicose and aggressive speech to the UN General Assembly, not once did Netanyahu mention ceasefire. And he also made this ludicrous, unfounded statement that every household in Lebanon has a missile, every kitchen has a bomb, thus legitimizing his attack on the civilian population and dehumanizing us as well. So I don't feel very optimistic, if I'm honest with you, James.
And of course, I mean, Hezbollah continues to send missiles into Israel.
That is deplorable indeed, but we have to be mindful of the facts. 82% of the exchange in fire between Hezbollah and the Israeli military is from the Israeli military. So that's a fact, you're right. Hezbollah are launching missiles, and I condemn that in the strongest possible terms, but I also condemn what the Israeli military are doing.
Can you tell us a little bit about Lebanon as a country? Because there's a danger of conflating it with Gaza, which is essentially the world's largest refugee camp. Lebanon is a nascent democracy, albeit one that is in many ways in thrall to the Hezbollah movement, and its close associations with President Assad in Syria and Iran are well documented. But as a place to live, what is it like?
Well, there's a reason why the New York Times rated Beirut the number one travel destination worldwide for its nightlife, for its hospitality. Lebanese people, we love life, James. We love life. You know, we are friendly, perhaps too friendly, educated. Many of us speak multiple languages. I know it's a trope, but in the past it was the Paris of the Middle East, right? You can go swimming and you can go skiing on the same day. And it's a beautiful place. We have delicious food. I would argue the tastiest food in the world. But there's so much more to us than how we are being portrayed.
And that portrayal is designed to muster support for the continuing
Oh, absolutely.
attacks.
Very much so. These negative caricatures and tropes, and I think they dehumanize us. So, yes, I think these portrayals are being used to justify the attacks in Lebanon.
Your parents are British Lebanese.
They are indeed, yes, British passport holders, yes.
What's the connection there? Where does the British half come from?
So my father migrated from Beirut to Belfast in the 80s.
Blimey, out of the frying pan.
Well, that's what my mother says. My mother says it was like jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire. So this was during the Troubles. And actually she said there wasn't much of a difference between Beirut and Belfast at the time. Grief. And so he used to work there as an obstetrician, and then that's where I was born.
Right.
A day after the leader of the Phalange, Kata'ib, Gemayel, was assassinated, and following that were the Sabra and Shatila massacres. But the connection to the UK is that my father used to work in the NHS for 16 years. He gets very nostalgic. And he is, as I said, he's a British passport holder.
And retired back to Beirut.
He did, yes. Back to Lebanon, yes. My father used to provide care. We don't have universal health care in Lebanon.
I won't ask you about physician associates on this visit to the studio.
It's not foremost on my mind at the moment.
I'm pretty sure it's not foremost on your mind.
No.
But I mean, You must just be worried. The stuff that you're currently worried about is obvious. Is there a point at which Mum and Dad will say, yeah, actually, we would quite like to leave? And do you worry that by then it might be impossible to actually get them out?
Well, that's what I'm worried about.
Right.
And I think part of me, because I live between London, Ontario in Canada and London, UK, and I travelled last week. And I think part of me is hoping that because my siblings are here, we can have a video call with them and we can collectively persuade them. But as I said, Lebanon is home. But we are extremely fortunate because they are in a relatively safe part of Beirut and they have that option as British nationals to leave. And that's not something that we can take for granted. But I mean, that's something that they will consider if the situation continues to escalate.
And have you had any contact with the Foreign Office? Would you need contact with the Foreign Office? Would you need
I
help?
think they would need. My sister was in Lebanon during the 2006 Lebanon-Israel war, and she was evacuated by the British government, and she was in close communication, and she was actually evacuated by sea because there were no commercial flights available.
And finally, if I may, you've written very powerfully about mental health, about your own about mental health. You're a consultant psychiatrist.
I am, yes.
We should add. So you have experience of both sides of the consulting room door. This must take a toll on you. I mean, are you looking after yourself?
I'm trying to. Thank you so much for asking, James, because I do embrace my vulnerability and I'm honest, open and transparent about my mental health experiences.
You've written a book called Breakthrough, which addresses all of the issues.
I did reach breaking point in the 2006 Lebanon war.
Right.
So this is very triggering for me because it does trigger the resurfacing of traumatic memories. And I'm mindful of that. And I utilize tools to contribute to my resilience and recovery. I mean, this morning I went for a 15-kilometer run. I know that if I don't do that, that increases my vulnerability. But I appreciate that social connectivity, creativity, physical activity, all of these tools contribute to my mental health resilience. Otherwise, I think that I would be in a darker place right now.
Well, I'm glad it's working, and long may it continue to do so. Actually, if you would, a quick word on the psychology of your mum and dad, because you can say it's home, but it's not safe. I mean, it's safer than other parts of Lebanon. I mean, are they a stubborn pair, or is it a form of patriotism? How do you rationalise this reluctance or refusal to do what you and your siblings are desperate for them to do?
Looking at it through the lens of a psychiatrist?
Yes, or a son, or both.
Or a son, or both. The mind mounts defense mechanisms, psychological defense mechanisms.
Oh, interesting.
I think they're in denial, if I'm entirely honest.
Of the level of danger?
Yeah, I think so. And they don't want me to worry.
Which makes it easier to cope with, even as it exacerbates the exposure.
It's an immature coping mechanism. So to answer your question, I think there is certainly an element of denial. They don't want me to get too worried or too concerned. Credit to my mother. I think she's coping a lot better with this than I am. But you don't have to be at the epicenter, James. You don't have to be in Lebanon to be suffering. Many people outside of Lebanon are traumatized. We are devastated. We are in shock. There's a range of emotions. There's anger. Look what happened when the British journalists went to Ain al-Dilla bin Saida, when the Israeli military, they bombed 2 buildings literally next to my uncle's. And my uncle was terrified that he would be killed with his family. And when the local residents discovered that the journalist is British, they expressed anger towards her. Why? Because they vocalized that Britain is complicit with the Israeli military because they are supporting them militarily, for example.
So I sense you don't have much optimism about diplomatic efforts from London or Washington.
Well, I mean, I don't know about London or Washington. I mean, certainly the foreign minister of Spain, because we know that Spain commands the UNIFIL, the United Nations Interim Forces in Lebanon. He issued a clarion call that the only way that we can achieve peace is by respecting international humanitarian law. I mean, is it superfluous to say that I'm not optimistic that the Israeli military will respect international humanitarian law? And there needs to be a ceasefire. The hostages need to be released, the Israeli hostages and the Palestinian hostages. And not only a ceasefire in Lebanon, there needs to be a ceasefire in Gaza as well. I will vocalise that, James.
Of course. And if only more would. Professor Ahmed Hankir, thank you. Should I mention your book? Would you mind?
Yeah, of course. No, by all means. Of course, I'm very proud of it.
A story of hope, resilience and mental health recovery as well, which will provide historical and health-based perspective on some of the stuff that we have talked about. and as I mentioned, Ahmed is a consultant psychiatrist, currently dividing his time between London, UK, and London, Canada. I will remember of all of this conversation, but the idea of an obstetrician making his way from Beirut to Belfast at the height of the Troubles will never leave me.
Oh, no, well, yeah, there's more to say about that.
I'm sure that I look forward to hearing it. It's 12:02. 6 minutes after 12 is the time. A complete change of pace now. I am drawn to this. Someone's picked up on the fact that I said a few moments ago, it's very difficult. I said, or rather, well, this message to me says, it's very difficult to hear punctuation on the radio. But did you just say, I think I might be feeling sorry for Jonathan Gullis? More on that later. I didn't put a comma after moron, actually. But now you've pointed it out, you'll probably think that I deliberately did. But I didn't. I'm feeling sorry for Jonathan Gullis. Because I think that is the correct and human response. You can't control your emotions, can you? But I'm a little bit worried. It's snobbish. We're going to talk about tipping between now and 1:45. So hold on to your hats for a conversation about tipping, which I find enduringly fascinating, not least because I still have very fond memories of being a waiter and not quite relying on tips, but certainly needing them. But Jonathan Gullis is back in the spotlight, albeit very, very briefly. And he has been telling a very sad story at the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham.
It's been hard. Look, I'll be frank. Look, it was nearly, 3 months now, and I'm still without a job, right? And that's scary. I'm a father of a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. I've got a wife who's extremely supportive, but of course is worried about the bills.
You were a teacher before.
I was a teacher before, and obviously I've applied for a few jobs, and sadly not even had an interview yet. So actually, I think the days when being an ex-MP was something that was wanted or desired is no longer. I think we're now seen as a problem.
He's so nearly there, isn't he? I think we're now seen as a problem. Who's that then, Jonathan? Oh, all ex-MPs. No, mate. I mean, if you're trying to get a job as a teacher and you spent much of your time in Parliament slagging off teachers, and the worst thing the man said was that when he was a teacher, his classroom persona was based upon, I kid you not, a combination of Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg. And that's where I worry that my sympathy for him is bordering on snobbishness. Stop sniggering at the back. I mean this. It's not, you see someone suffering and you have 3 choices. You can either enjoy it, you can either pity them, or you can feel completely ambivalent. And I'm not very good at schadenfreude. Even someone who I held in the lowest regard when they were in Parliament, like Jonathan Gullis, I don't enjoy seeing people in pain. I don't enjoy seeing people suffer. But not all people. I'm sure there are people I'd be quite either ambivalent or mildly happy to see suffer. And obviously, I'd like to see sort of truly evil people in all sorts of trouble. But I mean, is this snobbish, is what I'm asking you, right? So I feel sorry for Jonathan Gullis because he's like a sort of foot soldier who he was needed by the great con of Boris Johnson's administration and Brexit. And he thought it was all real. He waded in there with his size 6s all the way to ministerial office, I think he held at one point. Maybe that was under Liz Truss. And everybody watching from the outside could see, or not everybody, but a lot of us watching from the outside could see how pathetic it all was. But the ones that bought into it completely, I think they were being used by their social superiors. I think, the Red Wall was a huge exercise in inverse snobbery. Oh, let's just get all these thick northerners and tell them lies about Brexit and they'll propel us all the way to Downing Street. And people like Jonathan Gullis became, in a sense, the spokespeople for the Red Wall, all the awful ones from the last administration, the Clark Smith fella, 30p Lee, Jonathan Gullis. Unless you've sort of sought asylum with Nigel Farage's outfit, then you have been tossed in the bin, haven't you? And I don't know, maybe I've gone mad, but I was feeling sorry for him, and I still am feeling sorry for him. Yeah, I know that it's karma, says Alan, and everyone is sniggling, which is a very good use of the word, and it's not that good, because about 1 million of you have made the same joke. And just following orders is not a defence, and Craig says you're getting soft in your old age. Listen, I'd like to see Johnson get his comeuppance, don't get me wrong, because he's the organ grinder, right? But watching the monkeys get punished, I don't know. I don't know that I am enjoying it as much as I thought I might in the in the moment. Jeremy points out that I am perhaps misplacing my sympathy. Gullis is boorish and unpleasant. He won't be short of a bob or two. Let's try to forget him instead. And Seema says, no, please stop, no sympathy. Well, I don't know. It is 11 minutes after 12. I will take a call on whether or not we should feel sorry for Jonathan Gullis. Okay? And whether or not you can get a job as a teacher if you spent much of your time in Parliament slagging off teachers. Was you always accusing them of being activists or of pursuing woke ideology? I guess the sympathy dissipates the more you hear the sound of someone running at full speed into a brick wall called reality. But it's the people that promoted the unreality who've been unscathed. Jacob Rees-Mogg won't be worrying about paying the bills in the future. Boris Johnson's still trousering huge sums of money from the people that propelled him all the way to Downing Street and then came to his rescue when he had to flee it in disgrace. Greg says he's enjoying it. I'm not enjoying anyway. I just wanted to get that off my chest because I was very surprised by my emotional reaction to a clip that loads of people sent me in full expectation that I'd absolutely love it. And I was trying to work out why I didn't love it. And the first bit is just basic humanity, I think. And the second bit is he is not the organ grinder. He's a monkey. 12:12 is the time. So staff must be given 100% of tips from customers under a new law which bans businesses from withholding gratuity payments. If your company breaks the law and retains tips, a staff member will be able to bring a claim to an employment tribunal. What's going to happen? 0345 6060973 is the number here. I like tipping as a conversational topic. As a practice, I'm quite conflicted about it. I would never take the 12.5% off a bill, seriously, unless I found like loads of hair in my soup or something. Ugh. Or something like that. Well, I mean, the service that you really know is awful. It's got a little bit worse in London, which is where I experience most of my hospitality in recent years. Since Brexit, I would say, actually, service has got slower and a little less attentive, presumably because of the difficulty in hiring enthusiastic staff and indeed having plenty to choose from. So I could be wrong about that. But in my experience, hospitality has diminished, but not through surliness, just through people being overworked. I won't embarrass anybody by revealing where I was recently, but as a small restaurant doing about 30 covers with one waitress. And there's no earthly way. I don't know whether someone had phoned in sick or whether there was some other sort of crisis unfolding out the back. But one waitress trying to handle 30 covers, all arriving at different times, means that if anyone needs a little bit of attention, like 3 or 4 minutes of attention, that's it. The whole restaurant grinds to a standstill. So I made a point of giving her a tip on top of the 12.5% service charge because she'd done such an amazing job at looking after everybody, including us. So when I was a waiter, which is a million years ago, technically speaking, when I was a waiter, there was no service charge on the bill. I think we're just going to have a fairly simple conversation about what's best for customers and what's best for staff, right? So there was no service charge on the bill. This is going back to 1990, there and thereabouts. And there was a presumption that you would get a tip. And if you didn't, we were empowered by our rather splendid boss, who was also the owner, which I think is relevant, to comment on it. If there was no tip left at all, then we had to keep mum, right? We couldn't say anything. That's like absolutely your prerogative, that's fine. But if they left like 12 pence of change in the saucer from the bill, we were allowed to... I can't believe this looking back. We were allowed to follow them out of the restaurant and say, "Excuse me, sir, I think you've forgotten your bus fare." And most of us never had the guts to do it, not least because we were frightened of getting punched. But I hope you're not too shocked to learn that I did step up to the challenge on a couple of occasions. And I followed someone out. I mean, he knew exactly what I was doing. I think he told me to. He said, "Go and give this bloke his money back and tell him he's forgotten his bus fare." I went, "Seriously?" And I did. I followed him out and I said, because that was an act of contempt, 12 pence. Or whatever it was, 10 pence. Well, I mean, literally, shrapnel. I think it was all copper. In no way is that a tip. That's an insult, right? But I liked it because I would get a little bit more in tips than some of the others. because I had a bit of banter, a bit of chat, you know. That's what you get the tips for. Show a little bit of interest. Pretend you're going the extra 5 yards when really you're doing what you do for everybody. Make them feel special. Make them feel special. I loved being a waiter, actually. I think hospitality is one of the great failures of this country is its failure to imbue in young people what the Greeks called philoxenia, this concept of hospitality squared, the joy you take in looking after someone. I wasn't a waiter for a very long time, but I absolutely loved the job because you were the difference between somebody having a good time and somebody having a wonderful time. Someone leaving a restaurant with a spring in their step and someone just leaving with a full belly. You were the difference. Even in some ways, if the food is adequate, even more than the chef. Unless you're in a really fine dining kind of establishment, then the hospitality staff, the front of house staff, are probably going to have a bigger impact upon the mood you are in when you leave the restaurant than the actual catering staff are. I believe that. And I recognise if you're in a Michelin-starred restaurant or somewhere with a really good chef, then you put the first mouthful in and you go, oh, wow, that's incredible. But most of the time, certainly in chain restaurants, certainly in more run-of-the-mill high street restaurants, the difference between a really special experience and a really normal experience is hospitality, is the staff, the waiter, the waitresses, how they look after you. And so I used to love it up to the point that is coming, because we used to pool everything, which meant that I got the same cut of the pool that everybody else got, including, much as I loved him, the owner. Which I remember thinking at the time was a bit, I really offended my Marxist sensibilities. The owning classes keep all the profits and they take a share of the tips. But they did work front of house. So this cuts in so many different directions, this story. In America, you'll get chased out of the restaurant and reminded that we don't actually get paid. Staff will tell you we rely entirely on tips and you haven't left one. So I've just done, however many minutes work it is, for nothing for you. So I don't like the way that you tip 12.5% give or take now, regardless of what the service is like. Whereas when I was a waiter 25, 27, 20, 30, good God, I'm old, 34 years ago. When I was a waiter 34 years ago, you only really got a tip if they were happy with you. And they almost always were happy with you. So 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And the question is, what do we think about this? Very simply, you can draw on it with anecdotes, as I have done. But the simple question is, 100% of tips from customers must now go to staff. Is this progress? It will apply in restaurants, cafes, pubs, hairdressers, taxis. I don't quite know how taxis would lose out on tips. Not black cabs anyway. I suppose if you were working for a cab company and paying with a card, it might. Anyway, don't bore me with the details. What do we think about this? 0345 6060 973. David wants to know if, when I was working as a waiter, if I became working class. I would remind you, David, Kemi Badenoch has given an interview in which she made it clear she never has to apologise or clarify anything she has said because she thinks about things so carefully. And just because it was the same interview in which she said that she became working class when she worked in McDonald's does not in any way render her ridiculous. So stop being so mean and snarky. I don't know whether I became working class when I was working as a waiter during my holidays from public school. But I suppose we'd have to ask Kemi Badenoch whether or not it fulfills her criteria for class migration. What I do know is this. Giving staff 100% of tips from customers sounds like the right thing to do, but is not necessarily. And now we'll find out from you. 0345 6060 973. It's 12:20. It is 22 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. All right. I mean, my cautious sympathy for Jonathan Gullis has taken quite a kicking from you. Probably the biggest kick was a reminder of something he said when he lost his seat and indeed his job as deputy party chairman. And he said he wouldn't be returning to teaching because he didn't have the patience. I don't think I've got the patience to return to the classroom, he said. I'd also like to help the Conservative Party rebuild in whatever role may be available. It's pathetic. And you're supposed to feel sorry for the pathetic, aren't you? That's what the word pathetic means. Pathos It's pathetic. And what is pathetic about it is that he bought into the fraudulent visions of Boris Johnson and the like, none of whom will suffer in the way that he is suffering. But yeah, if he's been applying for jobs as a teacher and not getting them after describing himself as not really fit to be a teacher and spending much of his political career slagging off people still in the profession, then my sympathy is strained, but it's still real. If I was passing the hat around now, looking for tips after the quality of today's show, what would you give me? 10%? 12.5%? 15%? Why do some professions get tips and other professions don't? Answer. Well, what is the answer? The answer is there's a huge difference between levels of service. And that is why a fixed service charge makes no sense. Anyway, let's work out what your experiences are and how they differ from mine. Martin is in, Clacton-on-Sea. Bad luck.
Hi, James.
Nothing wrong with Clacton. Actually, you must be sick of the sight of your local MP, though. Honestly.
Well, I mean, I was quite heavily involved in the campaign against him, but obviously we don't see him very much. So
what?
Not too much to worry about.
Don't be ridiculous. Of course, he's always there. It's absolute nonsense that he.
Malaysia this weekend.
Is it this week? James? Is that the special meeting for international tax avoiders?
Last weekend. Yeah.
That was last weekend, was it? Well, long live. Carry on. Tips. What do you want to tell me?
So I used to work as a chef in central London, actually, and my contract in one of the Michelin restaurants I worked at actually included a guaranteed amount of tips included in my salary.
Really?
Yeah.
Was that quite a good restaurant?
Yeah. I mean, I obviously won't name it.
You can if you want.
No,
you didn't get fired in disgrace, did you, for stealing sausages?
No, I left it actually. I left quite quickly because I realised it wasn't really what I wanted. I didn't really want to be in high-end restaurants because of the level of stress, etc.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, no. So my salary was basically an amount of obviously an amount of money for my work, but then it included a fixed amount of money, which meant my monthly income was the same each month. But technically, part of that was trunk and part of it was technically salary.
So they guaranteed it to a certain level. But the service charge, the more I think about it, and it's one of those things that has sort of successfully become part of the furniture, isn't it? The service charge is just a way of...
Yeah, I think. I mean, look,
it bypasses my freedom to show my appreciation. I know I still can.
No, I completely agree. I mean, whenever I've gone to America, I've always struggled with the idea of having to tip everyone, and it's kind of like you're given you get spoken to not particularly nicely if you say, well, actually, I don't think the service was particularly good, so I'm not paying you the full amount of service charge. And I do worry that that's happening here. And actually, I agree with you. You were speaking earlier about what you felt the service level in London is deteriorated. When I trained to be a chef, we were trained to do front of house. It was seen as a skill set. It was seen as something that you progress up into. It was seen as a profession. Now it does seem very much like, and it did back in your day too, as a kind of a stopgap, but it depending on the level of the restaurant in which you worked in. And I do think that stopgap is now in a lot more areas of hospitality than it once was.
Yeah, well, you can't have it both ways either. You cannot have the service charge being used as a way of augmenting the wages to the employer's benefit and it being used as a way for the customer to show their appreciation for particularly good treatment.
No, I completely agree. I'm against having service charge on the bottom of a bill because, like you say, it removes the opportunity for you to show your appreciation. The only advantage to it is that it does then get shared across the team, as you said earlier, that it's pulled together.
But I didn't think that was fair.
Well,
because I deserve more. You're just the chef. I've delighted them with my banter and my jokes.
Correct, but if I did a particularly bad job at producing the piece of food for them, they were unlikely to tip you anyway.
I'd say it wasn't my fault. It's Martin in the kitchen. He's a right old kid.
No, of course, but we're a team, right? We're a collaborative effort. I don't think it should be equally shared. I believe that you get the lion's share of it, of course.
Do you know the worst bit, Martin?
Go on.
Was that there was some customers who'd left a tip. This happened to me on a few occasions.
Yeah.
And we'd be standing by, like the last to leave. We're often the best tippers, obviously. So we'd be standing by the bar, and they'd already tipped when they paid the bill. And then as they were leaving, because I'd looked after them so well, they'd give me an extra $5, you see.
Yeah.
And because everyone else was there, including the boss, I had to say, "Oh, thank you so much. That's so kind. Thank you." Then I had to go and put the £5 in the communal tip box. It used to be, I've never had such sticky fingers in my life. They had no business. They had no right. But
yeah, no. I mean, I personally have done, I've actually before refused to pay service charge on a bill based on the fact that I didn't feel it was particularly good as an overall experience.
But if it is there, then it should be going.
I'd pay the waiter, etc., directly in the same way as you've just described. Obviously, if they chose to put that in the pool, then that's up to them.
So there's three things. What are you doing now? You're still cooking, but just in a different type of environment?
Photography and web mainly these days, and running political campaigns every now and again as well.
Yes, fantastic. Well, there's another one soon. There's three worlds here now. So there's the world I was in, which is where you only really tip if you have to register your delight. There's the world Martin was in, which is where there's 12.5% on everything, and employers end up using it like a kind of way of saying, actually, our menu is £12.5 pounds more expensive, 12.5% more expensive than we advertise, and it kind of becomes part of the budget rather than a specific service charge. And then there's the new world, which arrives today, which is where you've got the service charges, but there is a legal guarantee that every single penny of it goes to the staff. There were stories about some chains. I went through a phase. God, I'm so boring. I went through a phase for a while of saying, I was trying to teach the girls a lesson. I very much doubt that it worked. Where I would say, does all this go to you? And then sometimes they would say, they'd look around and see if because a few chains in the news, weren't there, where it was revealed that the service charge wasn't all going. That's why this law has been introduced. So I said, does the service charge go to you? And they would say, yes, we share it out equally, or they'd say, no, not all of it does, actually. It goes through the books or whatever. And in those circumstances, I'd say, could you take it off the bill? And then I'd leave cash. I thought I was teaching the girls such an important lesson. I'd struggle now to tell you what that lesson was. But this is better than one of those worlds, because this means all the service charge goes to the staff. But what's the likelihood that some of them see their hourly rate reduced, or if not reduced, they're not raised when it would have been? I don't know. It's a blooming minefield. It's 12:30. Jenny Balsby has your headlines. .33 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Henry Riley, is he going to be flying in? Has he gone into the sky? You can't really go for rides in London's air ambulances, can you? Just even Henry Riley's charm would struggle to persuade someone to give him a freebie. But he is covering a very exciting story about a huge fillip to one of the, incredibly important elements of emergency response and healthcare in the capital. We'll find out about that shortly. Before that, looking at tipping, looking at news that staff must be given 100% of tips from customers under a new law which bans businesses from withholding gratuity payments. This story has got actually loads of political dimensions to it as well, because people sometimes struggle to fully accept the rapaciousness of vulture capitalism, the way in which, even though you already take a much bigger slice out of a business than anybody else does, because you're the key shareholder or the owner, a lot of your time will be spent trying to work out how you could take even more. So, you're an investment fund and you buy a successful and established chain of restaurants. The first thing you do is look at portion control. Can we charge the same amount for a bit less? Can we buy slightly cheaper ingredients? Because every penny that you save goes to you. So why wouldn't you do it? If you've bought it entirely as an investment vehicle, you're not deriving any pleasure whatsoever from the joy with which people leave the restaurants. It's why quite often big chains struggle and suffer in the long term after a big investment company has come in. And this would be exactly the same. So hang on a minute. We're charging on the bill. We're charging 12.5% on the bill, and then we're giving it all back to the start. We don't have to do that, do we, by law? No, boss. Well, let's stop doing it then. Give them all 5%. Give them a fixed fee every month and we'll keep everything above that figure. That's how this stuff happens. I mean, it is, the capitalist excess, you could call it, where business is dedicated to trying to create more and more and more money for the people who own it or the people who've invested in it. Tips are a lovely way of showing your appreciation for the people who've actually contributed the most to your enjoyment of the meal. You could argue that the person who owns the building or the person who owns the business has contributed more, but he gets to keep all the profits. She gets to keep all the profits. So a tip was a lovely way. And that's what's changed, isn't it? They've come in, they've looked at it, they've had a look at this big pile of money, not quite on the level of Robert Maxwell looking at the Mirror pension fund, but they've looked at all this money and thought, I'll have some of that. Even though, culturally, never mind financially, if you're anything close to my age, we were raised to see the tip as a different form of relationship entirely. I've got an idiot's corner. Who would have thought that there could be an idiot's corner on a topic like this? But there is. I'm going to lose it now. I'll see if I can remember roughly what he said. Oh, yes, said Stephen. You've abandoned your Marxist principles pretty quickly when it comes to tipping. Well, there are two problems with this, Stephen. One, I'm about as far away from being a Marxist as it's possible to be without being the kind of shareholder or owner that you describe. And even if I was a Marxist, the idea that if the customer gives me £5 and doesn't give it to you, I don't know that a Marxist would be particularly perturbed by that. Who'd have thought we'd get an idiot's corner out of a phone-in about tipping? But anyway, it's something I want to talk about on the programme. I keep seeing the word socialist appear in commentary, particularly on social media. And the ignorance of people who use words like Marxist and socialist, there are hardly any Marxists or socialists around. There are some socialists. There are no Marxists in public discourse in this country. Jeremy Corbyn isn't a Marxist, wasn't a Marxist. There are absolutely none. And yet in the world that Elon Musk is building, the idea is to sort of, I don't even know what you're supposed to be frightened of. Everybody coming along and stealing your money. And oddly, you manage, as with immigration, you manage to scare the people who haven't got any money much more than you do the people who have. 12:38 is the time. I digress. James is in Hawley. James, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How's it going?
Very well, thank you.
First time caller. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Do you think radio presenters should be tipped by listeners?
Well, you could put it on there, and you could have a little bing, bing, ding,
at the end
ding,
of this call. Yeah, exactly that. Carry on.
And then you could look really good and be selfless and give it all to charity.
What do you think I am, a Marxist? Carry on. Why did you pick up the phone?
I've been in the service industry for over 30 years, and I've done everything from collect glasses, bus tables, worked in the kitchen, been a chef, been on the floor, been behind the bar, which is where I spent most of my time, and I've owned a few bars and restaurants as well.
Oh, cool.
And I still think, after all these years, the fairest way to do it, is to pull all the tips.
Do you?
Because, and I'll tell you why, I used to make so much more tips than everybody else, generally, in most of the places where I worked at.
Same.
And people seemed to like me, and they used to tip me, but I'd have to spend more time on those customers. And other people would probably serve more people than me, or do more. And you have to look at the whole business as an entity in itself, like the whole thing, and be like, we all make it work. Some people serve more drinks, some people talk more, some people are more hospitality.
You're just right, aren't you? I completely abandoned. Hang on, I'm in the business. Stop talking. I'm trying to abandon my previous position. That never happens on this program. You're just right.
Oh, amazing.
Isn't
Thank
it?
you.
There you go. Look how easy that was.
Yeah, it's the truth. And I've worked in so many places. And when I was an owner, I didn't take tips, even if I did a shift, right? And do you know what? I've also abandoned that theory now. If I had a place again, if you work a shift, you should get a share of the tip. And that's just fair, man.
You're very good at this. Have you hypnotised me or something? The boss I was describing was one of the best bosses I've ever had. It was an absolute joy to work for. There's one thing he did that I think you'll disapprove of. We'll get to that in a moment. But you're right, aren't you? I mean, it is a form of equality. Everybody gets a share because someone might have spent 40 minutes cleaning up sick in the toilet.
Yeah, and the other person has just been really charming to 15 tables, and they've got all the tips. Why should they keep that all?
Yeah.
I was cleaning up sick in the toilet, for God's sakes. That's really...
You're right. And the owner, because not to take a share of the tips would be to sort of introduce an us and them type divide on the shop floor. If the owner is prepared to put in a shift as every bit as hard working as everybody else, he should get some.
And the others should want to give them those tips as well, because
Yeah, Marita's pointed out that you would get the tip at the end of this exchange rather than me.
Well, I'm sure we'd work it out in the end. We
could pool them, couldn't we? Yeah, we both get half each. Okay, final test. He didn't feed us.
Pardon?
He didn't feed us on a long shift, so I'd get in.
Oh no! Do you know what? That's one of my best bosses ever, who taught me a lot and made me the person that I was in hospitality.
Yeah.
Used to feed us really well.
Yeah.
And he used to always do a meal before the shift.
Yeah.
You had to come in early to eat it.
Yeah.
You'd have to come in early enough to eat your meal and be ready for work, 5 minutes before work. And he swore by it because he was like, well, you need to be fed and ready. There's no point turning up to work late, being tired.
Completely agree.
Just sneakily encouraged us all to turn up half an hour early.
Gets worse. Oh, no. Right?
He never used to feed you, and
he'd sit and eat himself, and we'd serve him alongside all the other customers.
Am I allowed to spell out swear words?
No, he was right. He was still one of the best bosses I ever had, and he was right about everything else.
Except for that.
But I always found that incredibly difficult. So my mum used to leave out dinner for me. I'd get in at midnight. I was groaning.
Yeah.
How old are you? How old are you now?
I'm 48.
Okay, so a little younger than me, but probably in the same sort of ballpark. You'd come home and the pockets of your trousers were groaning with the weight of £1 coins.
So
do you remember that?
Yes, I do. And I used to stick them all in a jar and be really happy.
I think I had more disposable income during those years in terms of just being able to just reach into the bowl in my bedroom and walk out with a fistful of dollars.
There's a bowl of change.
Yeah, and pound coins went quite far in those days. It was not. But no, he never fed us. So all right, I was wrong about the tipping. Of course, they should all be equally shared out. And Mr. Banter over there. It's all very well him giving himself a pat on the back for being so charming, but look at Keith over there cleaning all the vomit in the toilet. Who's actually made a more valid contribution to the safe running of that shift? The vomit cleaner upper or the sort of joker? Thank you, James. Hang on, are you still in the business?
I'm just literally yes, but no.
What?
I train people now.
Oh, do you?
My son's in the business, and he doesn't get fed where he works. And he says it's so pants.
I know a bloke looking for a job.
Okay, let me know. Send me an email.
Jonathan Gullis, he's called.
Okay, let me know. I'll put him in touch with some people.
Of course you will. 12:43 is the time. Jenny's in Woolwich. Jenny, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
Not a lot to say after that fella. He was wonderful.
Yeah, all right. Let's not get carried away. It's my show.
So are you. that goes without saying. So when I was young, I waitressed, loved it. I wish I'd never given it up. In my 50s, I went back into bar work, and even though my daughter got an English degree out of King's College, she loves waitressing. It's what she does. I always remember there will be under the unscrupulous bosses and companies, and it was the companies say more than an individual restaurant owner who genuinely.
I think you're right. Well, that's why I mentioned it. It's investment funds.
Yeah.
That's when you want to panic.
Oh yeah. But what they could do is they could say, right, what we're going to do is we're going to put the prices up by say 10%, which is all us, and you can all keep whatever goes in, and we'll put up the kitchen's money by 50p an hour, 75p an hour, and then stuff you. You're right. It is. It's.
You could see it a mile off. Why have you bought this chain of restaurants? Is it because you love providing people with a wonderful time and good food and memories, or is it because you've paid a ton of money for it in the hope of making even more?
Well, absolutely.
And how are you going to make even more?
Well, you just exploit every loophole you can.
You could massively improve the service that you're offering. You could turn it into the best chain of restaurants in the world and you'd make more money, but it's a lot easier to shave a little bit off the cheese, take a little nibble out of every burger, pay the waiting staff a bit less and keep all the tips.
Yeah, well, I'm another one. I hated sharing my tips back in the day.
Yeah, we were wrong.
Because even though you had the person who would clean up the stick, yes, and I would always bung something like that.
Yes.
But you had the really lazy so-and-sos who wouldn't lift a plate, wouldn't wash a dish.
Yeah, but they wouldn't last long, would they, back in the day?
And moaned like heck.
Yeah, no, you're right. That would hurt, having to share the tips with the people who had consciously avoided work as opposed to people who'd put in just as hard working a shift but in a slightly different area. Should we squeeze in one more? I think we should squeeze in one more. Tim's in Guildford. Tim, what make it snappy.
Hey, James, how you doing?
I'm good, Tim. What's on your mind?
We spoke back in July. You were talking about the 4-day working week. I forgive you if you don't remember the conversation.
No, anyway, I remember the conversation.
On that particular day, you allow me to mention the company that I work for. We provide a platform that provides temporary staff to the hospitality industry.
That was it.
As such, we've been tracking the tips allocation bill for months now, and the effect that it's going to have on hospitality operators. One of the big issues that we have, well, personally, I think it's a good thing, right? The businesses are not holding on to the tips and service charge. It's being shared across all of the workers.
Right.
However, there is a problem.
Go on.
Many of these businesses, they use temporary flexible staff to plug gaps. Somebody calls in sick, they need to call somebody in from a temp agency. That guy goes in and works for a day or for 2 days, however long it may be. The problem that this is going to create, you have got your core loyal teams that have been with you for weeks, months or years. They're fully trained. They've done the extra hours when you've asked them to work the extra hours. These guys now, they are going to be picking up the same tips and service charge as the casual worker that's just popping in for the day.
But only for the day?
Yeah.
It'll be divided among how many shifts you've done.
Yeah, but just for
Why
the
is
day.
that a problem?
So the problem is for those members of staff that have been there for years, that have shown their loyalty.
Yeah, but it's not loyalty. I'm not tipping your loyalty. I'm tipping the service I've received that day.
No, precisely. I understand that. You as a customer, you're just tipping the service that you're receiving.
Yes.
But imagine if you're that member of staff that has worked there for years, that has shown their loyalty, that has gone the extra.
I don't know. I agree with you. I'm not in the habit of admitting I'm wrong. So the fact that I've done it so completely with the earlier caller means that I'm unlikely to do it again now. But I don't know that I agree with you. I'm trying to. So here I am. Yes, year 7, absolute stalwart of the waiting staff. Get a share of the tips for every shift that I do. Here's someone on his first shift. He gets the same share that I get. No, I'm fine with that.
James, I talk to these operators, whether they're pub companies, whether they're casual dining.
I know you do. I'm just disputing their reasoning.
We've been talking to these guys for a long time now, right? And they know that their core members of staff, they are not going to be happy about picking up the same amount of tips and service charge as the one-day casual worker who's coming in.
But only for that one day, though. It's not like they're getting a week's worth of tips for one day's work. They're getting a day's worth of tips for one day's work.
I get that.
I know you do. I do too.
The hospitality industry right now is struggling to hold on to staff.
Yeah.
Right.
Does the agency worker get a better hourly rate than me?
That depends on who you're actually working with.
Okay, well, if they're that worried about their long-term staff, they can improve their hourly rate. And give that, there you go, I've solved it. You can have that for nothing. Actually, no, it'd be nice if you left 15% on the door. I like this. I've lost it again. I'm getting too many messages. I can't keep up with them all. But I like the one who said, James, I've really enjoyed today's show. Robert, I shall listen to 10% more adverts afterwards as a tip for you. Be sure to share it with your team. Cheers, Robert. And Scott, who disguised himself as a publican in Brentford. Which means I shall almost certainly, if I haven't already, be making your acquaintance soon, Scott. It says, no, not the owner. The owner should have fun working with his staff and then let them share in the bonus of his split of the tips. I'll leave that one hanging, but I was wrong about the other stuff. That is 18, 14, 22, 34 years. 34 years I've been wrong about that. Here's a little lesson for right-wing people. Look at that. I've been wrong for 34 years there. And in the space of one little phone call, I can realise it, acknowledge it, admit it, and be better. There's hope for everybody. It's never too late to change. 12:52 is the time. You know, I love it when the planets align unexpectedly, like yesterday when we were referencing Brassic, rather splendid comedy programme, and Felipe was in it, was listening and rang in. We love things like that. I don't know if you were listening on Friday when we were talking about the impact of COVID on healthcare professionals. And Angus rang in and compared his experiences on the trauma team on July the 7th, on 7/7 in 2005, with his experiences of COVID, pointing out that the latter was considerably more harrowing than the former. And he reminded us of how crucial London's air ambulance was on that day in treating the 200 patients that could only come to his hospital because it was the only one with a helipad on the roof. London's air ambulance, I subsequently discovered, made 18 trips that day. Here's a little reminder.
I worked at the Royal London in the A&E department there on the trauma teams.
Right.
When I first qualified. And I was there for 7/7 in 2005. I was one of the senior radiology guys in the department, along with some very capable colleagues. And that was horrendous. We had arms and legs piled up in the corners of the resource room. We had patients coming in blown to pieces.
Oh my God.
We were the most, we took, because we had HEMS on the roof, Helicopter Emergency Medical Service.
Right.
I mean, you're obviously aware of that because you live in London.
Yes.
We took the most patients easily because we were the only hospital at the time with a helipad on the roof.
Got it.
And also that morning there was a meeting of 8 air ambulances. So we called them all in and we had them hovering. It was like Vietnam. It was like Saigon. And the operating theatres were working 24/7, 24 hours a day for weeks on end, trying to put people back together.
So when it crossed my desk, news crossed my desk 3 days later that the London's air ambulance was celebrating, if that's the right word, some rather good news, we obviously thought we better get Henry Riley down to RAF Northolt to find out what's been going on. And he was in quite august company because I think, Henry, the Prince of Wales was there as well.
That's right, James. A very good afternoon to you. This really is a momentous day for the 10 million people who live, work and travel in the capital every single day. London's air ambulance absolutely smashed their fundraising target, raising £16 million. And as you can probably see behind me, there are 2 new helicopters which people in the capital will soon see above London's skylines. This is a crucial service. Since they launched in 1989, they have helped to treat nearly 50,000 people, many of whom in a critical condition. Last year alone, they treated over 2,000 people, 5 people a day. You were speaking about major events. Take the Grenfell Tower fire, take 7/7. London's air ambulance are always on the scene when it matters most. And speaking with LBC this morning, London's Mayor Sadiq Khan said he was extremely pleased by the news.
I want to thank not just the air ambulance staff, the paramedics, but also the Prince of Wales, Prince William, and all those who have donated to purchase these 2 new ambulances. We know the difference they can make. When you go to one of our 4 trauma hospitals that has a helipad, you see that on a daily basis the difference these helicopters make. I've spoken to trauma surgeons. I've met young Londoners whose lives have been saved as a consequence of the work of these helicopters. So look, great day today. We celebrate 2 new helicopters joining our fleet. Clearly we hope they never need to be used. Unfortunately, they will need to be used and there will be lives saved going forward because of these 2 helicopters and because of the generosity of those who've donated towards them.
And James, as you rightly mentioned, the Prince of Wales, Prince William, was here, who is an ambassador for London's air ambulance. He is also himself a former helicopter air ambulance pilot. He served as recently as 2017 in the East Anglian air ambulance. He was here meeting not just the pilots, but also the paramedics, the consultants, crucially people who owe their lives to the charity. David Beckham was also here, meeting people, finding out about the work that the charity do. And crucially, it is those people who say they owe their lives to the work of London's air ambulance. I was speaking just a few weeks ago to David Johnson from Essex, and he actually came off his bike after he suffered a cardiac arrest, and he credits the air ambulance with saving his life.
I believe they were there within under 9 minutes, but I had a cardiac arrest, so I was actually dead until they arrived. And I owe my life, and everybody else that is around me that loves me owe such a lot. These guys just came out of the sky, and I'm even getting choked up now. It was just wow. As a service, this is like magnificent. And as a charity, it's difficult to understand that it is a charity.
And you heard there from David just how much it means to those people who owe their lives to the air ambulance. This really is a day to celebrate, James. £16 million has been raised by the charity. Brilliant. And as you can see behind me, 2 brand new helicopters will be in operation from today.
Fantastic. What a guest as well. Rather, what an interviewee. David, you could feel the sort of emotion in his voice and the power of his story through down the airwaves. Henry, thank you. Safe journey home. Do you get a lift back?
I wish. No, the weather isn't too great today, so I think it would be a bus and a train, I think, for me, not a helicopter.
Henry Riley live for LBC at RAF Northolt, where, as you've heard, 2 new helicopters have been unveiled as part of the London's ambulance service provision as a consequence of an extraordinarily successful fundraising campaign. What a lovely story. That is it from me for another day. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts. Download now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.